DNA. Okay, I talked about how science doesn't know really what they're dealing with DNA. This is a point I want to bring together because we talked about fire letters in one part of one workshop, and then we talked about other aspects of DNA in another. This will bring it together a little bit of how these two things work together. Okay, the scalar wave programs. Now we learn up here that DNA are actually the observable portions, chemical translations of scalar wave programs that exist in the morphogenetic field. Okay, scalar wave programs that are held within the DNA imprint. These create the diversity of form. Different programs of scalar waves create different DNA in the manifest levels, which creates different biologies. Okay? These programs, though, the scalar wave part of the DNA, the part below the part they're seeing, we call them fire letters. That's an ancient term that was used in Enochian teachings. And in the Hebrew teachings, they talked about fire letters. They were talking about the scalar wave patterns that, when activated within the DNA, allowed the body to turn to light. It allowed particle and antiparticle to fuse, to turn into fire, and go to the next octave. They were talking about the secret mechanics, and they were always trying, the Hebrews especially knew this process existed, even with all the repression of information our histories have been about. They knew there was a sequence to fire letters, which are represented in the shapes of the Hebrew alphabet, some of them. They knew there was a sequence that held the secret to higher evolution, held the secret to opening the relationship between man and God. They knew there was a secret to ascension, and it was in the fire letters. They were right. They didn't take it as far as fire letters are scalar wave grids that affect other scalar wave grids of your DNA, that if you do it this way, it can, yes, make you turn into light and go up to the next octave. They didn't take it that far. Once upon a time they did. This information was taught before. They didn't use the term DNA. They didn't need it. That was just another chemical thing that happens as a result of the real stuff underneath. So there were terms in other languages that were applied to the core templates. They were applied to the genetic imprint below the DNA. But it helps to understand, if we want to understand this process of evolution, and if we want to understand what indigos are, we need to understand a little bit about how evolution works in general within our bodies, because it works different with them. Okay? We simply need to understand that we can look at our DNA instead of just identifying it as the chemical components of gene code that science uses now. Look at it as, yes, it's that. But it is also programs of scalar waves that are called fire letters. The DNA is a sequence, several sequences of scalar wave programs run together. They create flash line sequences that create the templates upon which your matter particles are built. Okay? It is a science. Simply expanding our concept of DNA into the concept of sequences of fire letters upon which the chemical translations manifest will begin to help us understand the process of biological transmutation, which was our original imprint. We were not meant to die. If you understand how to activate DNA and you can fix the mess that's been done to our DNA, death was not originally part of the human condition. Transmutation was the way to get out of here. You didn't leave a body behind. You didn't have to. The bodies didn't get sick because you knew the mechanisms by which they stayed healthy. That's all been taken away from us because of the way our history unfolded. The indigos are bringing back our heritage. They're bringing back the knowledge. And I know this, and I know it intimately, because I'm one of them. I'm one of the indigos. There's 3 types we'll talk about later. I'm a type 1. And I'm not the only one. There's 350 like me right now, and there's like 2,500,000 of type 3. So there's a lot of indigos here already. Okay? When I speak about indigos, I'm not speaking about somebody told me something about indigos and I'm passing on to you. I know what it's like to be raised in an indigo body here. I know what the indigo body means and what the gene code is doing. So I'm speaking from the heart as well as the mind when I talk about this stuff. We need to understand how our DNA functions. If we're going to understand how the DNA of the indigos differs from that of human, why they are considered, even though they birthed through human bodies, why, through human parents, why they are considered literally a hybrid ET race. There is a distinct difference in their gene code. And I've done diagrams in these chart packs to show you that difference, because it becomes really apparent when you have the spatial relationships in the visual diagrams. So we'll see that in a little bit. Now, let's see. Okay, we need to also, if we're going to understand the whole process, our ascension process, to understand indigos, we need to understand our ascension process. We've been through these teachings in parts in other workshops. This is like a quick roundup, and especially if anybody that hasn't been to the other workshops, this is the crash course in DNA ascension mechanics. So you get that by the wayside as you learn about indigos. All right, you have biology and consciousness, which are matter and spirit, are intimately intertwined. They're composed of the same substance. This is what science doesn't get either. Consciousness, our bodies, matter particles, are made of units of consciousness. That is the only substance that really exists in the universe. Consciousness is a substance. It can be quantified. It can be grouped. It can be structured. It is not a byproduct of matter particles interrelating with each other. It is not a byproduct of brain chemicals firing in certain sequences that give you the ability to think you're alive. It starts first. Matter, the experience of matter, is built on a core of consciousness. Consciousness is energy, and at least science acknowledges that energy cannot be created or destroyed, it just changes form. Consciousness cannot be created or destroyed, it just changes form. This is what the whole thing is about. Energy is consciousness, and consciousness is energy. Science knows energy's always existed. They can't figure out where before energy, what was there. There was no before energy, or there would be not now, you know. It gets into those really riddle-like questions, which came first, chicken or the egg, who knows, you know, because somehow they just always existed and, you know, are representations of each other at different phases. So anyway, if we acknowledge that biology and consciousness are composed of the same substance, we begin to realize this is a part of our mind. We begin to realize that the higher parts of ourselves we don't see are part of our body. We have 15-dimensional anatomy that we're not taught about in health class. We need to be taught about this stuff. I mean, we might learn how to brush our teeth and, you know, comb our hair and, you know, exercise and do all those good things to keep your physical matter body healthy. But it's like knowing you have a thumb and not realizing you have a hand, an arm, and a whole body with a head and a brain to go with it. This is what's happening and what we're taught about our bodies. We have a 15-dimensional identity structure, which is a 15-dimensional biological structure with 5 harmonics of matter density. We need to learn this if we're going to help indigos. Because the awakening process, the process by which a soul who comes in here and then has the ability to awaken, to remember who it was before so it can remember what it came to do, requires a knowledge of the 15-dimensional identity. You come in here, the gene code shuts down. Those levels of consciousness that were in the higher fields block out. The gene code blocks them out. If you don't have the mechanics here available, say, okay, when that happens, here's how you fix it. Here's how you open up the gene code to bring the rest of you back in. You just stay that way. Indigos are going to stay lost. And that will be a real shame if that happens. Because a lot of them are just going to backfire, and they're going to be like firecrackers holding too much energy, and they're just going to explode. Others are just going to fade and just drop the bodies and leave if they can't awaken. A lot of them go into drugs in the teens because it numbs them. They feel things that they can't put words on yet, and they don't have a belief framework to understand themselves yet. They try to think they're normal. After a while, they realize they differ. They realize they pick up on things that their peers are not picking up on. They realize that all these like competitive sports in school, indigos tend to go, you know, how archaic, you know? It's like, you know, the old days when they fed people to the lions for fun. You know, indigos tend to carry a consciousness with them, even if they can't verbalize it, of aversion to a lot of these things. Type 3s can be competitive, but most of them are just beyond that kind of stuff. And they feel different, but they don't have a framework to understand why they're different or what they're supposed to do with that fact. It gets to be very painful, not to mention the fact that they're so sensitive to electromagnetic frequency that standing by like Xerox machines or being in trains that are, you know, electrical trains or any of these things that normal people just don't have a problem with affects them. I used to ride, when I'd ride in a car, the vibration of the motor of the engine would make me physically sick. And it would take me 2 hours of recalibrating my fields and like just curling up in a ball and bringing my energy back in to neutralize what simply the vibration from car engines would do. Imagine what indigos living under high-power wires are experiencing. Their bodies go into mutation. They get cancers more easily from it. These children are sensitive to all sorts of things that average people aren't. We'll cover some of that as we get into understand more of who they are. The most important thing I want to get across first is who they are and how that can be possible. By showing you the frameworks of DNA, of multidimensionality, and reminding you how those pieces fit together. That is saying, what I'm going to say next, this is how it's possible. So before I say what I want to say about the indigos, and you go, oh yeah, right, you know, I've already given you a framework to understand where that can be a very rational choice to believe. So that's why I do it this way. I try to break the information down in a way that your logical mind, that just like everybody's logical mind here has been programmed in a certain way by society that, well, if this, this, and this aren't met, then it's not real to me. I won't listen. I want people to listen about the indigos and understand who they are. So I have to give the framework. So you can say, well, I don't know if I believe it yet, but I see how it could be possible. If she's right about dimensional structure and DNA and all that stuff, it really could be happening, couldn't it? You know? So that's the level of opening that I want to make in the consciousness. The people in this room are great because most of the people have been through workshops and they've been already familiar with the paradigm. This is the way, if you want to get across to other people, particularly if you happen to be in the psychology area, in the psychology fields or anything like that, or in medical fields, you need to realize you can't just dump it on people because they're going to say, you're absolutely nuts, and if you happen to be in the professional community and let it slip, you're going to be blacklisted big time. You know, they will harass you. You know, if you push forward with movements about it, they will probably try to suspend your licenses and really, you know, mess with you. The government organizations and stuff that control things. This has to be very quietly, an understanding that has to be very quietly and gently moved in to the masses of our race. And it's only going to touch the most intelligent levels of our race who are willing to come out from the old programming and say, you know, maybe it isn't the way we were taught. They're willing to learn something new. But everybody can learn to do this. If you realize, if you explain a little about dimensional structure to somebody, if you're talking to your scientist colleagues or friends like that, say, okay, this is how dimensions work together. Where did you hear that? You know what I mean? Oh, some person's teaching it, but anyway, you know, don't get into me or who I am, or it doesn't matter. What matters is, oh, I learned it anyway. You know, let's get to the point. This is an interesting way of looking at things, don't you think? And I've heard that those children that they're having such problems with, actually, it's about this for them. You're showing them a paradigm in a non-threatening way. You're not saying you have to believe this where they say, you're saying this and I'm saying the opposite. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. That gets nowhere. You have to open up the awareness in people. And the people who are getting this information first are the ones who will be able to go out into the world and begin to say, okay, I know something that they don't know and that they're not going to want to know. You know? So I have to gently filter this information in the right places, the right individual. There's an opening to metaphysics there. Let's take it that way. We need to spread the awareness of indigos if we want things to work out well over the next 20 years, because they're going to get worse and worse and worse. Indigos are here not only to help themselves grow, to help us grow. They're here for the planet, because there's things happening here that if they weren't here, we wouldn't be here by the end of 2017. Okay, we'll get into that later too. Okay, let's see. Let's see what the DNA. Okay, I want to say one more thing about the 5-letter sequences that are really the core of the DNA imprint. Remember, 5-letter sequences are scalar patterns. The manifest chemical components of the DNA are the chemical translations of those 5 letters, or at least the ones they're able to perceive with our equipment of identification. There's a whole interdimensional spectrum of DNA chemical translation they're not able to see yet. Anyway, so we have the 5-letter sequences of each DNA strand correspond to each dimensional band. Each dimensional band in that whole structure, morphogenetic structure, 15 dimensions, each dimensional band is a scalar grid, and it has a specific amount of scalar patterns. Each dimension has 12 subfrequency bands, which means it has 12 flashline sequences that we talked about before. Okay? These flashline sequences are really what the DNA is, the scalar patterns of the DNA. The fire letters are the flashline sequences. So not only do our DNA and do we have fire letters that form our morphogenetic structure, the whole universe is composed of these. The whole dimensional structure itself, the progression from consciousness to matter and back again, there are specific structures of scalar waves that are fire letters. Each dimensional band has a certain configuration of flashline sequences, fire letter sequences. When a form is built up to become manifest and to come down in through the matter densities down into here, it will take on, in its pure form, the arrangements or flashline sequences of each level of the dimensions. So there will be a part of you in your individuated flashline pattern that adopts the flashline patterns of D1, of D2, of D3, of D4, all the way up the 15-dimensional scale. This is reflected in your DNA fire letters. Your DNA fire letters are supposed to be, when they're operating properly, a small version replica of the fire letters of each dimensional band. And by progressively bringing them into activation where they begin to flash on and off, you progressively expand your consciousness and de-densify your matter. This was the process as it originally worked until they started pulling things out of the flash line sequences and twisting the fire letters. Distorting your fire letters is distorting your DNA. And that's what happened to our race. Is one of the reasons the Indigos are back. Okay, we can go past that one. Okay, now, the Diamond Sun 12-strand DNA matrix. People who have been in the workshops before understand that I've talked about the original human imprint being a 12, not a 2-strand DNA pattern. This was the original design. There is an original design, which means somebody designed it, the DNA imprint for the human form. What we have right now are 3 active strands. That's all. We get 3-dimensional consciousness because we have 3 strands activated, which allows only 3 dimensions of frequency, scalar wave patterns, to translate through the hologram into manifestation. Originally, we were supposed to have 12 strands. Now, the strands don't look like this. This is a diagram that I use to show relationships of strands to each other. And to show you, there's other diagrams that in other courses on the DNA that I get more into, I show you what's contained, the basic codes contained in each strand. So this is a diagram. This is not how, if you look real close down into your morph structure, it's going to look like that. There are geometrical relationships of these scalar wave grids that have very specific, what they call geomancies, or angles of interrelationship. This is not those. This is simply a way to show you strand content, strand amount, so you can compare what yours was supposed to be when you were originally designed as being a human consciousness, what it is now, what it needs to grow back into being, so you can reclaim your ascension codes, which are your appropriate fire letter sequences that correspond directly to the dimensional bands. This is what our evolution is about here, even without the Indigos. This is what we have been trying to accomplish all along down here on planet Earth, was to try to rebuild our original imprint because it was shattered at one point. It's a morphogenetic field that had 12 primary fire letter sequences, flashing on and off sequences. Some of those frequencies were completely pulled out. The flash line sequences just didn't exist anymore, which threw off the whole calibration of how consciousness related to itself. This is DNA mutation. Mutation of fire letters, distortion of fire letters, distortion of scalar wave patterns translates into DNA mutation, translates into perceptual distortion. We have been living for 200,000 years under perceptual distortion caused by DNA mutation. We have been trying to re-evolve back into the 12-strand DNA pattern, which means each one of these strands, each line here represents a strand. That represents a flash line sequence, a fire letter sequence, that corresponds to one dimension, that corresponds to one dimension of your consciousness. 12 strands implied 12 dimensions of consciousness embodied in a human form, which is an avatar identity that's capable of moving its vibrational rate where it wants to, appearing and disappearing at will, and manifesting in 4 harmonics of matter density wherever it chooses. That was our original potential. We have the ability to reverse mutate that, and I've done workshops on that, and that's what our programs are about. I have the Tangible Structure of the Soul program here, which is the beginning. Cathara Healing is the second level. We're learning to reverse mutate the mess that our DNA is turned into. If we realize our consciousness that we use to, if we think a thought, we are making a waveform. If we hold an image in our mind, we're not just imagining things, as psychology would love to try to get us to believe. We are creators created in the image of the original creator, which simply would think, and thinking, by the process of thinking and cognating, would create many morphogenetic fields within itself. We do this. Every time we think a thought, we're creating a thing in scalar form. We're creating a template that something will manifest upon. If we begin to understand this, and we begin to understand, too, that our DNA is what? It's a scalar pattern. They're the same substance. Waves affect waves. The scalar patterns we put here and direct into the DNA will affect the DNA. You can reverse mutate. You don't need scientists and laboratories and fancy equipment to do this. All you need is to know how to use the equipment you came in with, your mind-body-spirit system. And this is what we teach, how to begin the process of repairing this DNA so we can get our higher levels of consciousness back. So all this stuff they talk about that seems so far out to many people becomes common knowledge, because on your higher dimensional levels of identity, you already know this. You don't need me to teach you there because you already remember. Here we just forgot because the DNA code blocked it. So we're in a process of remembering, not creating something that doesn't exist. We're just remembering what was always ours, which was the 12-strand heritage. It's important to realize this heritage because if we want to understand indigos, we're going to be able to start seeing, with understanding this heritage, how they differ from the basic human imprint in a good way. But it's kind of mind-blowing. If you consider right now, we're working on 3 strands of activation. We're actually, I think, what's the next one there? I want to show the root race chart. That's a ways up, huh? There we go. Okay. Now, we're aiming for, our evolutionary objective is the 12-strand pattern. Okay? We're on 3-strand right now. This is the overall pattern that we have been involved with for many millennia. The 12 tribes and the Earth seedings. We're a part of a huge, huge, long-term evolutionary experiment that has been ongoing for many, many thousands of years. This is the 3rd time this race, our race, was seeded on this planet. It got wiped out the other 2 times. And that some of that history is in the Amente, Voyages Amente book. Much more of it is coming in the new books, if I ever get time to write them, because more of it, I have been accessing more. But we need to understand something. There's a pattern in a design that's absolutely beautiful to the evolution of a race. Imagine you're a very high being up there beyond matter density. You're going to create a race. You're a creator God. Not the big God, but a smaller God. We're all faces of God. We all have creative ability. So you're going to create a race of beings. This beautifully designed, eloquent plan was created by which we'd have 12 tribes, 7 root races, and 5 cloister races. The root races would be a period of time on the planet where one type of being that had one type of one of the strands, one of the flash line sequences, moving the consciousness through this certain time period would create evolution of one DNA strand. That's what each root race did. And to get here, it implies you have incarnations in the earlier root races, or you wouldn't have 3 strands. The way you got to be a 3-strand being was to have evolved first through the earlier root races, which are Polarians and Hibernians. They are actually an etheric matter race that started on harmonic 3 of Earth, which is called Gaia. The physical root races started to come in down through here with the Lumians. All right. They were evolving strand 2. In our seeding, these already got wiped out. We're back up here. They reseeded them again. These 2 were all right. They reseeded from number 3, root race 3, Lemurians. They were working on evolving strand 2. So everybody in this room and everybody on the planet, to be here in a strand 3 body implies you have Lemurian incarnations in your cellular memory that gave you the flash line sequences and fire letter sequences. Associate it with that time period. Associate it with strand 2. Associate it with the 2nd dimensional frequency bands. Okay? These were here 73,000 years ago. That's when they got seeded here. Now, with each root race, there was a cloister race that came in with the purpose of 2 things. First, the cloister race would come in first and birth through the root race potential. The cloister race was a bigger flashline sequence DNA. It had more strands. And out of that, smaller versions would come to evolve the particular strands of the lower parts. So each root race had a cloister race affiliation. 75,000 years ago, the first race to come in physical were called the Urantrians. They had in their flashline sequence of birth strand 2 plus 7 through 12. Now notice with all the cloister races, they have whatever the single strand is that their root race went with, but they also have strand 7 through 12. They held the potential of the 12-strand pattern, anchored it here into the race morph field, so it would be a potential for the races. Because if they just came in with one strand, they would have stayed one strand. You needed to have a race that would hold these higher potentials while the lower potentials were evolved and the strands were built up to meet them. The process and design of our evolution is literally passing through these thousands and thousands of years of root and cloister race cycles to progressively and very slowly rebuild the flashline sequences of our 12-strand DNA pattern. It didn't have to be that slow, but it was an agreement made by stellar races that would be stretched out over many thousands of years. Because the last time we were up there, this race, we got a little full of ourselves and created some real messes. So there are beings in the higher harmonics that don't want to hear anything about giving humans the key to the kingdom again. Not anytime soon. They want to make sure when we evolve down here, we get it this time, and we learn compassion, and we learn to use our power with wisdom, because we almost blew a planet up when our race was in the higher harmonics. That's how we got down here in the first place. So there's a lot of politics going on in the higher harmonics with the beings who reside there as far as how much humans are going to be allowed to know. When it was finally agreed that they'd even let us re-evolve to get our consciousness back out of being stuck down in this harmonic in fragmented form, they agreed to allow the Mente rescue mission to take place. We fragmented from harmonic 2 the consciousness of the race that was the human race there. Fragmented. Literally, its morphogenetic field blew apart, and little fragments of consciousness just blended in with the dimensional frequency bands down here. And they would have stayed as undifferentiated units of consciousness if the original imprint of their morphogenetic template was not re-entered down here so they could start to build back up into it. It was building our consciousness back up in this harmonic to get back to what we were before we blew ourselves apart. It's hard to understand from our scientific perspective that doesn't even like to acknowledge anything above D3. But it was a very grand evolutionary plan of races over long periods of time to give us back our original potential. At this point, we are here. And when I speak about Aryan race, every one of the root races has all of the colors. Okay, so Aryans are not just white. You know, there are black Aryans, there are red-skinned Aryans. They're basically red, white, black, brown, and yellow were the basic skin categorizations, and there's all sorts of combinations of all of those. So each one of the root races had a predominant cloister race that had a predominant one of those colors, but then they would have all of the other colors in each race. So every race color was represented equally in all of the root and cloister races. Now, we've managed to evolve through our Lemurian period. The next one was to evolve strand number 4, or strand number 3, in the 4th root race cycle. That began with the Branoa cloister. Now, I was a member of this. I had an incarnation in that period, a couple of them in that period, so I remember certain things from that period. Last time they were here was about 72,000 years ago. Before that, before they got wiped out the first time, they were here 3 million years ago. These are ancient, ancient races we're talking about here. Okay? Before that, I believe they came in, no, we didn't get that, yeah, we got that far, 12 million years ago. So when we talk about the Branoa race, which are actually related more closely than any of the other cloisters except the Melchizedeks to the Indigos, we're talking about ancient, ancient races of beings here. This is an ancient genetic imprint. So right now, we've managed to get to the point where we're of the Aryan 5th root race cycle. Most of the people on the planet, and probably few of the people in this room, are of the Aryan root race. Evolving strand 4, just coming into opening up 4th dimensional frequencies into your awareness, just beginning to acknowledge the astral level of existence, just beginning to have perceptions associated with 4th dimensional consciousness. That's where most people are at in our present times. Most people in this room are probably more so in through here or here, where you're working on 4th through 5th strand development, because the information that I'm carrying comes in on a minimum of 5th dimensional frequency at this point. People who can't hold 5th dimensional frequency in their consciousness, they don't have the flashline sequence receptors for it, will not be drawn to this information. They can't process it. They won't be able to grasp it, and that's okay. So the people who are drawn here, sitting in these rooms, learning this stuff, it implies that you have a gene code that has some of the higher strand content to some degree, because that's drawing you in to receive information that's coming in on these frequencies. But most of us, most of the people on the planet walking around out there in Sleepersville, are of the Aryan race, just beginning strand 4 activation. When we see that, and then later we're going to see what the Indigos are, there's a striking difference here. Okay. All right, these guys, the Aryans started about 65,000 years ago. They came out of the Haibiru cloister. Now, the Haibiru is not the Hebrew. They're different. They're two different race strains, interrelated, but different. Okay. The Haibirus were working on strand 4 plus 7 through 12. They were here about 68,000 years ago. When we look at our race lines here, and I can go right down to telling you, as far as races that exist on the planet now, where they came out of, what matrix they came out of. I'm not going to do that, because right now the consciousness on this planet would take that information and use it to hate each other more. They would use it to divide themselves and to point fingers, I'm better than you are, and to try to dominate each other. So there's a level where I won't plug in the final plugs to tell you, you know, what this race is, what that race is, what that race is. But I will mention what the Hebrews are, because actually all of our seeding has to do, this time, has to do with the Hebrews that came from the race cycles before, when everybody got destroyed. Okay? We've had Hebrew-Egyptian lines. This is where all of these root races and all these cloister races came out of in this third seeding, out of the Urtites 800,000 years ago. That's when this whole third seeding process came into being. Back down here in seed number 2, which was like from 3,700,000 years ago to about 848,800 years ago, that's when we tried this before. So, you know, same root races, same cloister races, didn't get very far. But some of the individuals from the cloister races here survived. And they were taken to other planetary systems, some were taken to inner Earth systems. We got the Hebrew strains in through here, right at the end. It was an attempt to save the declining races here, because they were getting into genetic mutation through Anunnaki visiting and messing with the gene code. Is a mixed cloister race. We have the Hybiru, which is the fifth cloister that goes with the Aryan root race. And up above that, we have the Melchizedek races. And you'll see this word in the New Age movement a lot these days. Melchizedek this, Melchizedek this. What in the world is Melchizedek? In its truth, it meant many things, but one of them was it's a literal cloister race of beings. And they are starting to enter here now. They're starting to enter their birthing cycles. But these are even small compared to what the Indigos are. The Melchizedeks are very advanced. They come in with strand 5 in their birth imprint. And their life cycle is about activating strand 5. Really, that's a future time. The Muvarian root race is actually would be in the future from where we are. So when we have the Melchizedeks birthing in, they're beginning the next wave of evolution that would normally come through the Muvarians. When we move from strand 4 into 5 activation, probably several 100,000 years in the future. Indigos are even beyond this. You'll know this when you get beyond it. But you need to understand this basic structure to see, okay, who's at what stage of evolution? Each one of these races represent a phase or stage of evolution evolving back up toward the 12-strand pattern and beyond. Okay, so right now we have some Melchizedeks coming in. Many of the people drawn to this material, because it comes in on a D5 frequency, which goes with the 5th strand. They have the 5th strand, which means they have a receptor to pull in 5th dimensional frequency, which means that they can respond to information that comes in on this frequency. So most people that respond to this at all have something to do with Melchizedek gene code in them. You are probably part of a cloister race, just to be in this room, this cloister. But if you're Indigo, you're even more than that. Okay, I'm a Melchizedek, but I'm an Indigo Melchizedek, and we'll get into the differences later. Okay, we'll get into this, too, when we're understanding Indigos. The Uniseti cloister, that's supposed to go with the one I can't even pronounce, Uinjuki 7th root race, that's evolving strand 6. Remember, we're down here right now. Okay, evolving strand 6. They're a future race, in harmonic 2, where Earth there is called Tara. Okay? They're many, many, many thousands of years in the future before our race would naturally evolve into that imprint in its original design. The Indigos come in with strand 6 activated. People here come in with strand 3 activated. Most people. They birth in with the 3rd strand activated. They spend the process of this life and many others afterwards, possibly until they're done, activating strand 4. Then they birth into this race and they do strand 5. Then they come into strand 6 activation. It's a completely different race by then. It's a whole different root race. It's a whole different race cycle. It's a future race cycle. The Indigos, one of the special features is that they're born with 6-strand activation. When you go into the dimensional scale, this is why they're called Indigos. It's a New Age term that was coined by people who can see auric fields, who notice that they tend to have a real concentration of the blue frequency spectrum in their auric fields, more than average. There's a reason for that. The 6th-dimensional frequencies that go with the 6th strand have what's called a capstone color. Now, every dimension has a capstone color, which is its primary wave spectra. If we remember, the color is a wave spectra, a wave pattern. Every dimension has a capstone, which is the primary wave pattern, then it has all these little wave patterns inside of it that are the color spectrums within it. Blue, Indigo, goes with, we have blue on strand 5, Indigo on strand 6, and then goes into violet in strand 7. Dimension 7 goes with violet Dimension 6 goes with indigo. That's where they get indigo. They didn't even realize this. They were reading the auric fields and saying, I see this color. It wasn't known yet about the design of the DNA evolution, so nobody knew yet to look for what does that mean with the strands. But it's kind of interesting that it translates right into that. Strand 6, the capstone color, is indigo. They're born with strand 6 activated and strand 5 activated. Most Aryans are born with 3 activated and the imprint for strand 4. They don't even have the imprint for strand 5, 6, or 7 through 12. If you happen to be born a cloister, now these are mostly out of here by now. It's like a race cycle that phased out and moved into the next level, into the Aryan root race. Now we're moving into the Melchizedeks coming in. These are very special individuals. They have higher consciousness abilities because they are born with the strand 4 activated most of the time and the imprint for strand 5, which compared to the Aryans is much advanced. Compared to the Hybiru, it was advanced. So it's a progressive advancement of strand activation and integration of consciousness, which creates genetic evolution of the race while simultaneously creating consciousness evolution of the race. It's called biospiritual evolution. That's the process we're all involved in, whether we realize it or not. When we get into beings up here, they're not even supposed to be here right now. They're beings from future race cycles. The consciousness of those beings has many more flashline sequences in it than ours do, many more scalar grids, which means more awareness. They have access to more of their higher dimensional identity than we do, and they have this from birth. This can be a gift, and it can also be a curse. And the way our society is structured right now, to the indigos, it's a curse. It makes it almost intolerable to be here for some of them. Now, they're even more than this. This is just the beginning, 6-strand activation. It's much more than that. When we get into who are these consciousnesses coming in and where are they coming from, that's when it gets amazing. That's when we learn something that has not been clearly put here for many thousands of years, which is, where did we come from? What is our lineup of consciousness? What races did we come down through the matter densities from? Okay? Obviously, the fact that we're in physical matter implies that once upon a time we were part of some race that had semi-physical matter, semi-etheric matter, and then a race above that that had etheric matter. There are races of beings, not just individual parts of yourself, but individual parts of races that went all the way up the dimensional scale. There's a stellar heritage here that has been totally banned from our history books by the Anunnaki primarily, because they wanted to be able to manipulate from behind the scenes like little humans down in a petri dish. We're the little sheep to play with, and just make sure they don't know too much, because they might rebel and decide they don't want to play, your God and we're subservient anymore. The information that we're giving here on the DNA, on who we are, is essential to understanding who indigos are, because you can see where they differ, but it's also a revelation for us. It's our chance to grab this information and run, to get out of the mind control, distorted history nonsense we have been taught for years and centuries and thousands of years, to say, wait a minute, there's a part of me that remembers some of this. I did come from somewhere higher, and this is the way it works. That's when you throw out the history books and say, all right, let me remember how it works. Let me remember how to reclaim this. Let me remember how to do cellular transmutation, for one. That would be really great. I don't have to incarnate down here in the densities anymore. Yes. Yeah, you'll start to remember. We got to realize we're part of a huge evolution program. And the only reason we don't know this is because when we were in our very small, just beginning to evolve down here days, each time we were thrown down here with the lower strands, the ones who were controlling this design, some of them decided they weren't going to let us in on the secret. Others decided they were going to take this original design and do something completely different with it and hijack it. There are beings in Harmonic 2 that have 11th dimensional consciousness. They have the ability to have 11 strands of DNA. Do not want humans to get back to being 12-strand DNA. Why? We'll have a whole other dimension of consciousness beyond their own. We'll have stronger genetic capacity than their own, and we will be more powerful, aware, and intelligent than they are. We will be a force to contend with, because we will realize at that point what they did to the evolutionary cycles of our race here. And they're very nervous that we may be very upset when they find out how, by being so helpful, they mutated this race, where it took many more thousands of years to move through this design than it was supposed to. It was not supposed to take all these millions of years to get the 12-strand pattern back. That happened because continually races that did not want this race to evolve back into what it was made sure they interrupted the evolutionary cycles, or hijacked it, or mutated it, or took it this way, or took it that way, just so it doesn't go back to the 12-strand pattern. Many of our religious teachings were purposely seated there to put us in subservience to some God figure, not teach us the ascension mechanics at all, and to make sure we never realized that we were embodiments of Creator. We didn't need middlemen. We have power in the fact that we are part of Creator, just like those higher beings that like to play God are. They didn't want us to know this. Our race has been mutated repeatedly. This is one of the reasons why the Indigos are back. Because at this point, if it doesn't get changed, if some intervention isn't done, our gene code is going to go right down the tubes, and we will completely lose as a race this capacity. It will be mutated out of the potentialities down here, and we'd have to reseed the whole thing all over again. The ones in higher harmonics who have assisted us in getting this far are very tired too. They're tired of it getting to a certain level and collapsing again. It's like trying to build a snow fort, and every time you get to the roof it falls in, and you have to start over. After a while you say, you know, maybe on to another project. You give up. They don't want to give up. The ones who are really our elder races, what we came out of, they don't want to give up on our evolution here. But if they let it get any further down, if it goes any further down, it's going to be a whole other race. This race that we're turning into now, by the mutations we carry and by amplifying those, will completely block out our ability to reclaim the 12-strand pattern. We'll become something that was not particularly foreseen or intended, a different type of consciousness that is three-dimensional, stuck in three-dimensional phase lock, will always be finite until it burns itself out and turns back into dust, dust into dust. If we evolve to the 12-strand pattern, we will be able to progressively accrete or bring to ourselves the higher levels of consciousness, move out of incarnation cycles in harmonic 1 up into harmonic 2, then up into harmonic 3, and move our way out of density while retaining our memory and our sentient identity. If you take that potential away and you cut something off at the 3rd strand, what you're doing is making it so they can get up to the 3rd dimension, 3rd-dimensional consciousness. At that point, the body shuts down and dies. The consciousness leaves the body, goes up into the higher bands without a body for a little while, has to find another body, create another body down here, and it reincarnates again, over and over and over, until eventually the amount of consciousness that was held within that original 3-dimensional part of the consciousness gets smaller and smaller and smaller. You're using up energy, and you've cut off the supply, the perpetual supply that comes from direct connection to source through the higher identities. When that happens, gene codes digress. And when that happens, consciousness gets to the point where it can't hold a human pattern. It can't incarnate anymore into a human form. So it goes backward instead of forward into evolution. It goes into de-evolution, back into eventually space dust, or units of consciousness within the lower 3-dimensional fields that will become used to manufacture other constructs of consciousness. You can always be you're always part of God, and you can do it in 2 ways. Being sentient, fully aware of who you were, who you are now, and your whole identity and consciousness are intact, or you can simply not be self-aware at all and exist within God as part of the substance that God creates with. It's up to us whether we want to evolve up into cognition or simply be space dust to be used for other beings who have cognition that are creating things. We're always part of it. We're always part of the universe. This is always part of it. This has been our plan. This has been what we have been denied for very, very long. I'm going to put one more out before we go. What do we got there? All right, we'll just go back to this. I'm getting told I need a break here. Are you guys ready for like a, yeah? All right, am I throwing too much at you?
Really hydrated today.
Yeah, we didn't even find out what indigos really are yet. Yeah, once you find out what it means as far as identity, it's mind-blowing. It really is. I'm very relieved because it took me till I was 35 to finally understand what the hell I was. Okay, to put it bluntly, I knew I was different. That became very, very obvious. It became extremely obvious when from the age of like 7, I had beings from other dimensions coming in and taking me through portals into inner earth and training me and doing all sorts of things that, forget even trying to explain to a psychologist, they warned me not to. I was told, don't even go there. This is between us. You will understand someday. And progressively, we worked with it. But I am so relieved. I finally understand what I am because I understood the stuff about the DNA and the levels and dimensions. The indigos are coming, and it's a real relief to me because I'm not alone. Yeah? And neither are the people. There may be indigos sitting here right now that you don't know you're an indigo yet either. I didn't know when I first came in. I just knew, boy, was I different. There was something that didn't quite fit here, and I progressively had experiences that took me further and further into paranormal land, you know, extraordinary experience. And I couldn't understand for a long time why. There may be people here that by finding this information, you have a new framework now. You might be saying, do I fit into that? Maybe I do. Gosh, maybe I'm an indigo. And when you start to realize what that means in terms of identity, who you are that's coming in here, you start to have some self-respect and start to get your priorities together. Because you say, oh, geez, yeah, I'm an indigo. That resonates. Oh, my God, I did come here to do something. You know, I'm starting to remember what I came here to do. I was part of a World Service team. We're here to try to stop pole shift. The indigos are here for huge reasons that our scientists are not even ready to fathom. And we'll talk more about pattern. Now, if you look at each one of those lines, a strand of DNA, which is a primary flash line sequence of scalar waves that hold the consciousness, each one is a frequency of consciousness. Taurinicium, 12-strand humans, could hold 12 dimensions of consciousness in a hominid form and would have full access to transmutational mastery in 4 harmonics, 12 dimensions of consciousness and of dimensional field, which gives them access to, by the way, 12 dimensions worth of time continuum cycles, because time cycles and time continua are all connected to these flash line sequences. We get a linear time progression because of the orientation of the DNA flash line sequences to that of the dimensional bands, and that's a whole other workshop too. So we'll just get into this for a minute. We have what's called the 12-strand diamond sun silicate matrix DNA pattern. That was the Taurinicium design. Before that, there was something called the double diamond sun, 24-strand DNA matrix. What that meant was, you take a Taurinicium and you take its antiparticle double. You take the 12 strands from here and the 12 from there and you put them together and you get something else entirely. It transmutes to a whole different life form that has the ability to hold 24 dimensions of consciousness. It has the ability to hold the memory banks of particle and antiparticle Earth, Terra, and Gaia. It has the ability to be simultaneously aware of itself in the various time vectors, not just one single vector consciousness like we have here. When we're dealing with indigos, we can begin to start understanding that by looking visually at the difference between a 12-strand and here is a 24-strand. Some of the indigos are born with this genetic configuration, and they're not the ones with the highest genetic configuration either. Okay? So I'm trying to show you relationships of things here, dimensions to levels of consciousness, so you can understand what indigos are when they come in. We can do heritage now, honey. Thank you. Okay. Now, we're getting to our heritage. This is the part I'm excited about being able to bring out, simply because we have been denied this information for over 200,000 years on this planet. Most of us don't even think there was anything before the Sumerians appeared spontaneously out of nowhere, from what I hear in the history books. Yeah. We have a heritage that goes back billions of years, but there is a heritage that goes upward, a vertical heritage, not just a heritage down here in harmonic 1 cycles. But in harmonic 2, there was a race that the harmonic 1s came out of. Our harmonic 2 race was the Tauriniciums, and our 12 tribes down here came out of that. Up in harmonic 3, etheric matter density, there was another race that the Tauriniciums came out of. This is where we start to understand indigos. Okay? We have to begin understanding the whole process by realizing that any hominid life form, or that having a human-like type form, began in harmonic 4, pre-matter liquid light density. In the Lyran star system, if we look up in Lyra, that's actually a location in our morphogenetic, in the universal morphogenetic field, in that area of the morphogenetic field, but on the 4th harmonic. There, it is a system of liquid light. It's pre-matter before it takes on etheric matter density. It's called the cradle of Lyra. It's also called the Christos. This is where the whole Christ issues come from. It's a level of consciousness, it's a dimensional reality field, a harmonic reality field, that holds the original pattern that the levels of matter density into form were built on. We were all seated through the cradle of Lyra, and all of the races in this time matrix, believe it or not, and this is where the whole concept of coming out of the one begins to make sense, All of the races came through a seed race that took on hominid form. The seed race came out of something before even hominid form, came out of a collective of consciousness, a gestalt of consciousness. And that goes up into the energy matrix levels, the ultra-terrestrial levels of consciousness we talked about that aren't even dimensionalized anymore. Those ascended mastery levels of identity, they're like cosmic families of consciousness that exist in pure scalar wave form. They're not even dimensionalized anymore. They don't experience space-time matter. They're eternal. We're all connected to them. To understand how life forms got into manifestation in the first place, you need to understand they came out of there. Then they dimensionalized into the dimensional structures, broke themselves down, and created shifting in the flash line sequences to create particle bases and the experience of perceivable matter, which is a hologram anyway. In the cradle of Lyra, in our time matrix system, our 15-dimensional system, life was seated there. And it was seated primarily, the hominid forms came out of a cosmic family of consciousness that if you take its vibrational rhythm and translate it into sound in the English language, it comes out to the word Melchizedek. There's things about language we don't understand either. That it's all about vibrational rhythms. And those vibrational rhythms are flashline sequences. And those flashline sequences directly interact with our DNA. Okay? I don't know if I can. I said that so fast, I don't know if I can repeat that one more time. Yeah, can I repeat that? What? What? I'm sorry. Oh, Melchizedek. Okay, that part of it, yes. I can slow that one down and repeat it again. Okay. Okay, Melchizedek is actually a translation of the vibrational pattern of the collective of consciousness, the cosmic family of consciousness that seeded the hominid forms. The flashline sequences, the scalar arrangements, have a sound translation when they're brought down the dimensional scale into light, sound, scalar waves. And when you translate those flashline sequences through the English language flashline sequences, you come out with the sound tones of Melchizedek. And in the Bible, they got as far as identifying King Melchizedek, who came in and did certain things in the biblical history. It goes way beyond that. You know, Melchizedek is a tonal resonance signature for certain aspects of consciousness that link all hominid forms within this 15-dimensional matrix. It's not just a big guy in the sky. It's not a god sitting on the throne that you bow down to. It's completely different than that. Some people interpret Melchizedek as that, Lord Melchizedek. There's certain groups in the New Age movement that call to Lord Melchizedek to assist them. What a Lord Melchizedek is, it's a level of the ascended mastery consciousness of the hominid race that exists beyond dimensionalization. It's a collective of cosmic consciousness that we're all connected to. You can call it Lord if you want to. I don't like the term personally because for our history it has implied subservience and servitude and really getting the not great end of the stick, okay? You don't have to call anything Lord and Master. All you have to do is recognize you're directly connected to your own inner master, which is your own level of higher dimensional identity, all the way up through the dimensional scale. Now, to understand how we got to where we are, and to where the indigos fit, where the Turanisium fit, there is a vertical lineage happening here, a vertical progression of flashline sequences, which is a vertical progression of fire letter sequences, which is a vertical progression of DNA code manifestation through the densities down into this one. This is what we need to understand, to begin remembering the truth of our heritage. And in the truth of our heritage, we will begin to understand where the indigos fit into the picture and why they're so important. Okay, now, we had the Melchizedek tonal signature, cosmic gestalt of identity for the hominid forms in this time matrix, sending portions of itself into the dimensions to create individuation, a form of race, to experience dimensionalized creation and space-time matter and those things that that experience creates. Coming down through harmonic 5, okay, is dimensions 15, 14, and 13. Harmonic 5 we call the Rishi level of identity. If you were to perceive a Rishi, first it'd be flattened because the frequency it transmitted would fry you instantly. It looks like a sun. Their spherical identity. It's beyond the form, that any etheric matter form, any pre-matter form. It is a scalar wave spectra that has the frequencies of a full sphere of energy. Or actually, Rishi has half a sphere, you put two together and you get a whole sphere, 360-degree energy, 360 fire letter sequences. It's all connected. Okay? If we understand the harmonic 5, each of us as individuals has a Rishi collective we're out of, but so does every race. So does every race strain. So does every planet. Everything that comes into matter has this progression of scalar wave patterns that progressively breaks itself down into smaller pieces, and to get back out of here, you have to progressively reassemble those pieces in the order that they were broken down in. That's why so many of us are stuck here in the time matrix. The fire letter sequences, the flash line sequences, the DNA patterns are no longer the same patterns that we came in with, and you have to recalibrate and put together the patterns you came in with to get back out. It's as simple as that. Okay, now, in the cradle of Lyra, the Melchizedek family created a group of, several groups of beings. The two primary ones involved with our race were called the Elohai, and that's not the same thing as Elohim. That's different. We'll get to that later. The Elohai and the Seraphi. They were both out of the Melchizedek collective, and they were both the first manifestation of individuation of the Melchizedek Rishi into harmonic 4, pre-matter, liquid light Christos. They were avatar collectives, and they created a liquid light form. We all have a level of this form that we can find too, by the way. The Elohai and the Seraphi and the family lines they created in the lower densities were the core of the whole polarity drama we have been involved with for billions of years before the human imprint was created. The stellar races who came out of those families went into issues of polarity imbalance, which creates conflict between beings. Polarity imbalance is basically a physics thing that comes down to balancing electrical and magnetic polarity frequencies. But when it translates into bodily consciousness and scalar wave beings, it turns into conflicts between DNA patterns, flashline sequences, and if you don't have compatibility in flashline sequences, you don't understand each other. This creates conflict in consciousness. And when you have conflict in consciousness, you tend to have things like wars. People down here in harmonic 1 think that if they think about angels and things up there in the higher harmonics, they think, oh, up in the heavens everything is sweet and hunky-dory and peaceful. Well, I hate to tell you, it doesn't get peaceful until you hit dimension 12. There have been interstellar wars for billions and billions of years trying to work out the polarity imbalances between the descendants of these two primary family avatar collectives, the Elohai and the Seraphi. And we are still in the middle of that major cosmic drama. We are products of that cosmic drama because the Turnisium lineage, human lineage, was created to try to help resolve it and get the flashline sequences back together, because then the harmonious consciousness would come back. We would start to understand each other again. Even when they talk about the races were all given different tongues, and then they had to figure out how to reassemble and be able to communicate with each other again. What they're talking about is not just languages. Those languages, again, just like the Melchizedek word, are tonal resonance signatures, which are flashline sequences. They were saying right there, even in the Bible, that we were broken down into separate groups of flashline sequences, and to understand each other and become whole again as a race, we had to put them back together into the original whole out of which all of those pieces came. Okay, now we have Elohai and Seraphi up in harmonic 4. This mentions 12, 11, and 10. There are other families of consciousness that were involved with seeding other life forms. But the one we need to understand first is the hominid life form, because that's what our consciousness manifested through. Okay? When the avatars of the Elohai and Seraphi began, and they're like creator gods, they knew they had creative power to manifest life forms, and they did. And some of them did, and they mixed this one with that one and that one with this one, and they found that when you mix flashline sequences in the wrong ways, it creates messes in the flashline sequences, which creates messes in the gene codes, which creates a distortion in the codes of ascension, and those beings become trapped in time. And they also go into polarity imbalance and conflict and the whole bit. Many of the Elohai and Seraphi families became what was called fallen, as we hear stories of the fallen angels and all of that. Fallen meant they could no longer expand themselves up and out of matter density because they lost some portion of the original flashline sequences of their design that would allow them to pull their fire letters together and expand back out of the time matrix. The fallen ones also had a fall in consciousness because the codes that were originally part of their makeup that would allow them to pull in the full cognition of the 15-dimensional spectrum in which the law of one is understood, where we understood the whole process that we all came out of one and we're really all one, they lost cognition of that. And they began to see each other as separate and something to fight with. They forgot they were part of each other, and they took different stances. These wars of the heavens came way before the wars on earth, and they still are ongoing. Now, out of those two families, the Melchizedek cloister, all right, which is like the highest level of the Melchizedek signature that retains the full codes of ascension all the way up through the 3 levels of the energy matrix, beyond the 15-dimensional scale, those 3 other levels, the triadic, polaric, and ecadic levels. There are other sets of fire letter sequences. They're part of the Melchizedek cloister, collective that holds that sequence as the potential so everything can get back out of time eventually, is called the cloister, the Melchizedek cloister. The Melchizedek cloister cosmic identity collective, knowing it had all these pieces of itself fragmented into the time matrix, holds those codes so they can give those codes back so the pieces of themselves stuck in the time matrix can re-evolve back into expansion, into being part of that cosmic family of consciousness. Now, the Elohai families of these two families were commissioned by the Melchizedek cloister collective to be in the time matrix, to be the one race line that would hold the original codes of ascension, the original full fire letter sequences out of which all of the races came out of. There was one original Lyran Christed pattern, one avatar pattern hominid form that had all of the flash line sequences that then were broken down into make different race strains. The Elohai family were appointed as the ones who would retain within their manifestations the coding that would allow all of the others to plug in and get their codes back so they could get out of time. The group of the Elohai family that was commissioned to do this was called the Emerald Order of the Azurite Council. This is where we get Azurite Temple. Okay? The Emerald Order is an ancient group of beings, so far ancient it loses its meaning in our context of time. But they were basically a group of the Elohai family avatars that agreed to stay in the time matrix, even though they could have expanded back out into ascension. They agreed to stay here to assist all of the stellar races back into evolving into the ascension codes as they are held within the Melchizedek cloister, which means it gave the potential, or kept the potential, of every being down in here being able to become an ascended master again. We all started as ascended masters. Before we started as Turanisium, way up there, that's where we all started as. It's not a potential we have to get, it's a potential we have to remember how to expand back into, because it's always been there. Okay, so the Emerald Order of the Azurite Council was a group of beings out of the Elohai family. They were avatar collectives in harmonic 4, pre-matter, liquid, light. Okay. The Emerald Order seeded down in the next harmonic a version of itself, and they kept doing this all the way down. So those codes would be represented in all of the harmonics, making them available to the gene pools in all of the race strains going down. Now the Emerald Order Elohai seeded in harmonic 3 etheric matter a race called the Anahazi. Not Anunnaki. Anahazi, okay? The Anahazi races, also known as Syrian whites, because that's what they look like if you see them. They look like white beings with the big slanted eyes and that kind of thing. They're an etheric race, etheric matter density, which looks kind of ghost-like to us if we see them. The Anahazi were commissioned by the Emerald Order above them to become representatives of the Emerald Order in that level of etheric matter density. The Anahazi represents the first etheric matter hominid imprint that all hominids in the whole 15-dimensional scale from harmonic 3 and below fit into. To re-evolve back out of time, every being will have to re-evolve back through that imprint to go back into liquid light Christos, and then back into Rishi, and then back into expansion into ascended mastery. There is one pattern, one hominid pattern, that all hominids emerged out of. There's much diversity after that point. But the Anahazi in harmonic 3 were appointed the guardians of holding the codes of that pattern together so it would always remain as a potential for any race, no matter how far they digress, because that's what they look like if you see them. They look like white beings with the big slanted eyes and that kind of thing. They are an etheric race, etheric matter density, which looks kind of ghost-like to us if we see them. The Anahazi were commissioned by the Emerald Order above them to become representatives of the Emerald Order in that level of etheric matter density. The Anahazi represents the first etheric matter hominid imprint that all hominids in the whole 15-dimensional scale from harmonic 3 and below fit into. To re-evolve back out of time, every being will have to re-evolve back through that imprint to go back into liquid light Christos, and then back into Rishi, and then back into expansion into ascended mastery. There is one pattern, one hominid pattern, that all hominids emerged out of. There's much diversity after that point. But the Anahazi in harmonic 3 were appointed the guardians of holding the codes of that pattern together so it would always remain as a potential for any race, no matter how far digressed it got and how far the codes and flashline sequences got messed up. So you have the Anahazi in harmonic 3. In harmonic 4, we have the Emerald Order of the Azurite Council. Now the Azurite Council part comes from the ultra-terrestrial collective. You have the Melchizedek cloister, and that has numerous families within the non-dimensionalized levels of the energy matrix, ultra-terrestrial families. The Azurite Council is the primary head family in the Melchizedek cloister organization. They kind of direct what happens in the time matrix here. So the Azurite Council is, they're ascended masters, ultra-terrestrial collectives of cosmic consciousness, if you want to look at it that way. So we have up in ascended mastery levels, Melchizedek cloister. Then we have the Azurite Council, which creates the Emerald Order, of the Elohai, which creates the Anahazi. The Anahazi were originally seeded into what we look up in the sky and see as the Lyran system, but in harmonic 3, etheric matter density. Because the other groups of the Elohai families and Seraphi families that were also creating things in the lower harmonics began to create things that were at war with the things that held the light codes and were trying to destroy them. There were battles that happened in the harmonic 3 etheric matter density of the Lyran system. And the original planet that was supposed to be the planet that went with Earth, Gaia, Terra, Earth, all of that lineup, was actually destroyed. The morphogenetic template for this planetary system was blown apart, and this planetary system was plugged into something else, but it wasn't its original flashline pattern, its original scalar pattern. The Anahazi race from Lyra in harmonic 3 had originally been inhabitants of that etheric planet. Now we have Gaia as etheric Earth. Gaia became something different because of what happened one harmonic above with the avatars. We had a pattern. Our Maharic shield of the planet was called Aramatana. Okay? The Anahazi and the Emerald Order were the guardians of Aramatana, the planetary flashline sequences, not just the hominid flashline sequences. In harmonic 4, that pattern was literally blown up. What that translated down to in harmonic 3 was the races of Lyra, the Anahazi races, fled. There was a group of them that kept the Emerald Order coding that was moved to a different part of the morphogenetic structure of the harmonic 3 universe, which corresponds to our Sirius star system. So they began as Lyran, and then they became Sirian. So the Anahazi, which is the original race imprint for all the hominids, that carries the full ascension codes for not just us, but everything else in this time matrix in hominid form, are considered Lyran, Sirian, Anahazi, the Sirian whites. They seeded the Azurite races, which some people who are doing contact, ET contact and stuff, they know this, the blues. There's a blue race. It's shown in the mythologies of Hindu literature. It's shown in Egyptian literature. Blue people. Yes, there were blue people. They were created in the next harmonic down by the Anahazi. We had Anahazi in harmonic 3, right? Harmonic 2 in the Sirius star system. The Anahazi created the Azurite race, the Sirian blues. This is our lineage. This is our stellar lineage before we became human, the patterns we had to pass through just to get into a human imprint. Okay, so we will all, in our higher levels, have what at this point is future time incarnations that are in each of these race strains. Okay, now, I have to take this piece by piece because I can really confuse you if I don't try. Okay, the Lyran Sirian, Emerald Order, Anahazi, and Azurite genetic imprint. That chain of identity that I just explained coming down, race identity, was the seed into which 12 other intergalactic mutated families were spliced into to form the Turanicium imprint that was the original human form. It was the seed coming down from Emerald Order, or Melchizedek, down through Azurite Council, through Emerald Order Elohai, into Anahazi, into Azurite Syrian Blue Race, finally into the Turanicium race, and then the Turanicium race into the 12 tribes that became the human race. This is our stellar heritage. These are the genetic, the scalar wave, the flash line sequences we need to reaccrete into our DNA in order to get ourselves into full expansion out of the time matrix. Right now we just got to worry about getting the gene code started enough to get through the changes that are going to be happening in the next 12 years. Okay? But that is the progression. And it's the first time this has not been convoluted, because for thousands of years some of the races from Harmonic 2 would come in and make themselves look like creator gods, like the Elohim, which are different than the Elohai. Okay, you want to put up the next one? We'll get into this because this is causing lots of confusion these days. There are Elohim communicating with channels from here across the oceans and to England and all other countries. They're starting to talk to their family down here. They're starting to talk to the humans, and what many of the Elohim are saying is, we created you. Just listen to us and we'll teach you how to be good humans. They're not teaching you ascension. They're not teaching you about flashline sequences, DNA, and how to get your codes back. They're teaching you, we're your parents. Listen to us. You have to ask yourself, why? Why? If they know, and if they're up there, they already know this stuff, why are they not teaching what the Azarites are teaching, which is the mechanics of how it works, so you can put it together and become independent and grow up to be just like them, because they don't want you to grow up to be just like them. They're parents that are a little nervous that the kids might grow up and be more than they are, and they don't trust us totally. The Elohim, here's where they came from. We had, entering in Harmonic 4, we'll start with, the Elohai Emerald Order families, okay? They had a 30 to 48 strand, what's called an Emerald Sun DNA configuration. Remember the 12 strand was a Diamond Sun configuration? Well, this is called the Emerald Sun DNA configuration. 30 to 48 strands, 30 to 48 flashline sequences that would allow not only the 15 dimensions of consciousness here to be assimilated, not only that plus its other 15 on the other side, giving you the 30 from the antiparticle universe, but also the 18 codes and their reverse from the 3 levels of the energy matrix. The Elohai Emerald Order carried the ability to embody what's called, or to have access while embodiment, to what is called the Ekar identity level, which is Ascended Master Level 3. Okay? Understanding this is important as we get talking more about who indigos are. All right, now, here's where Elohim pop up. When we had the Elohai races in Harmonic 4, remember I said how some of the races of the Elohai family and the Seraphai families digressed and created race lines that had their flashline sequences off, that they were stuck in time because they didn't have the connections anymore that would allow them to plug in all those frequencies to expand. Now, the fallen Elohim, they were Elohai once in Harmonic 4. They severed certain connections and reduced themselves to only 11 flashline sequences in order to get out from under the control of their Rishi identities in Harmonic 5. It was like a rebellion. We don't want to listen to you anymore. We don't want to do the law of one. We're having too much fun convoluting ourselves to the point where we don't make any sense to ourselves anymore. They decided that they were going to be creator gods without God, without that whole collective of consciousness. That any being that really reaches ascended mastery knows you can't divide it up in parts and expect that to work for very long. You have to recognize we are all one and all individual at the same time. And with the code convolution, or getting distorted flashline sequences in their consciousness and twists in their consciousness and the way they looked at things, the part of the Elohai family that decided to rebel against working with the higher councils, they became the Elohim. Some of them have evolved since then and rejoined the Elohai families. Now, these beings are awesome. If you see these beings, you get your D4 vision turned on and they come down to visit you, they are gorgeous. They are these white, you can't even describe them. They're like living light energy forms with sort of not quite human features and large eyes when they want to show you that much detail. They carry a presence with them that is awesome, and it just makes your heartstrings sing. You just feel, mama, you know? Your body, whether you're dealing with an Elohai or an Elohim, when that comes into your frequency, one of those consciousness, your body cells cry out, mama, because it feels the flashline sequence identification, even if it's not complete. So humans here can be so seduced by Elohim, who don't have their act together completely either, simply because of that biological identification of consciousness. And that's what's happening here. There are lots of Elohim channels at this point. Those people don't know if they're dealing with Elohim that are trying to help them re-evolve, or they're trying to trap them into another loop of evolution that, like we've been in for the last 22,000 years, actually. There's been things that happened because of the Elohim family lines that mutated our race down here worse than it ever had to be. We need to make the distinction between Elohai, meaning higher, and Elohim. And over here, in the Seraphi families, some people are bringing out information that, you know, the Seraphim are all the bad guys. Then it kind of gets put over into the Seraphi family lines. Not all Seraphi family lines are negatively oriented. Only some of them are. Just like with the Elohai family lines, we had the Seraphi. Now, they were able to hold, they had something called the gold sun matrix, DNA matrix. It could hold 24 to 30 strands, flash line sequences, levels of consciousness. They were seeded primarily into the Arcturus and Andromeda galaxies in harmonic 4. And they created their own race lines, which became involved with ours later. Then there was a group of them, and this is the ones we're having big problems with these days. Okay, they're back. All right, the Seraphim, that again, just like the Elohim over there, decided we're going to run our own universe, don't want to cooperate with the higher guys anymore, created their own race strains. They unplugged their flashline sequences to get out from under the impulsing coming from their higher parts and reduce themselves to a 10-strand pattern, but at least they could rule in 10 dimensions of reality. When a being or a group of beings cuts off part of their flashline sequences, there's a little catch-22. They become finite unless they feed off other things. If you have your flashline sequences hooked up through the 15 dimensions and into the energy matrix, you have a perpetual supply of energy and consciousness moving through you. You are an eternal being. It's just continually recycling, changing form. You don't go away or disintegrate or reduce yourself into space dust for something else to use as creative fuel. When you sever the strands, you become a finite being that has to take energy from something else in order to self-sustain. That's what this group of Seraphim did. Now, these are in harmonic 4. These are avatars. They're liquid light, dark avatars. They created race strains down the harmonics, just like the good Seraphim, or Seraphi did, just like the convoluted Elohim did. And these guys aren't quite as messed up as these guys. Okay, the Seraphim are the ones that created the real big nasties, as we call them. The Elohim are like in between the two. And the Elohai are the ones who still retain the codes of ascension for the races. What the Seraphim created in the next harmonic first was one of the major things that have given us problems here. They were in the Orion star system, etheric matter density, and they were winged Dracon. They look like dragons with wings and tails. Like a lot of our devil mythology comes from a cellular imprint of understanding that race, because once upon a time they interacted here and they forcefully crossbred with humans to create a hybrid strain called the Dracos, which is actually focused in Nibiru right now and is starting to mess with this race again. They're back, and it's serious business. They have 10-strand, what's called the Black Sun DNA matrix. It's called the Black Sun because in order to have that independence that they created, they not only unplugged everything above 10 strands, they reversed the order of the fire letter sequences in the rest. They completely turn the consciousness inside out. They do not have the ability to plug into the rest of the dimensional scale, which gives them a consciousness that cannot cognate anything but itself and its own needs. If you ever looked in a shark's eyes, like on pictures and on TV, there's this blank stare there. These guys are eating machines, okay? You can go up to a shark and say, you know, I'm a really special being and it's really not a good idea to eat me. Do you think it's going to care? It has no cognition level to have compassion or to think about you in that form. You are just fuel that it is biologically driven to consume. This is the level of consciousness, but amplified by 11 or 10 dimensions that you're dealing with the draconian matrix. It's an avatar matrix of liquid light beings that are majorly screwed up, okay? I'll put it in very loose slang down here. Very twisted consciousness. They need more help than anybody in the time matrix. They are so stuck here that they have had to turn themselves into the epitome of evil just to self-sustain. where they will suck energy off anything they can get their claws into or their flash line sequences hooked into, just to self-sustain themselves. At some point when we evolve, and the ones that are in higher evolution are trying to help these guys to get their coding back. Because if they get their flash line sequences back, they start to get more and more of that energy supply coming from source. But they're still in such a twisted frame of consciousness that they're afraid of the higher light. They're afraid of connecting with their rishi. And in their fear, just to survive, they have to consume. So it's like a very ancient drama that's still going on today. When we get down into what they created a reptilian version of Anunnaki. But they didn't create the first Anunnaki. This is where you get over here. Back over to the Elohai families. Remember, the Elohai families in the next harmonic down, harmonic 3, created various things. One of the first things in the hominid forms they created was the Lyran Syrian Anahazi. They were the ones that held the codes of ascension. I'll just refer to those flashline sequences, the right DNA patterns that get you all the way up as the codes of ascension, because that's what it's all about here. Evolution is about restructuring the codes of ascension so you get full mastery over manifesting and demanifesting wherever you want in the 15-dimensional time matrix and the energy matrix beyond it. Okay, so we have the Anahazi in harmonic 3. At the same time, down in harmonic 3, the digressive Elohim family, who didn't have any more than 11 flashline sequences anymore, created a version of itself in harmonic 3 called the Anu. This is where we get the stories that are popping up these days in the ancient histories about the Anu races. And there's a lot of mythology from the Syrian star system primarily involved with Anu, and Anu was a god and all these kind of things. Anu was a race of beings created by fallen Elohim. Like, you know, it's like, let's get it straight already. Before these guys that are channeling stuff, telling us that Anu were the ancient gods, bow down to these guys, don't do this. These are Elohim families. Elohim, we can love Elohim, but we can say, excuse me, there is something higher. And if you aren't teaching me about ascension directly, you're withholding something from me that you know about, and that means you have an agenda here. What is your agenda? We need to start interacting intelligently with what's happening here, because we're having contact. Now, here's where we'll get to understand where indigos come in. Okay, not so much over here right now. We have the Anu in harmonic 3 out of the Elohim. We have in the good guy Saras families, the Seraphite families, the Saras and the Saras, which later crossed with the Syrian blues and got involved with our Egyptian lines to recalibrate the gene code in our race to some degree. They're trying to help us. Now here, there are several race strains created in different reality systems. Like when we have Palladians talking to us through channels and that kind of stuff now, they're not just Palladians, it's like Earthians. There's a lot of different people here, you know? When you're talking to Palladians, are you talking to the good ones? Are you talking to the draconian ones? Which ones are you talking to? We need to be able to ask these questions. Okay, when the harmonic 3 Anahazi came down and created their versions of races down here, they created the Azarites, the blue race. We ended up with this family line here through the Hibernians, creating Anunnaki. We took Hibernians, we combined them with some of the draconian matrices over there, and we ended up with the Dracos Anunnaki here. We ended up with, there's actually an Anunnaki strain that came in with these, which was a little different than the basic Anu pattern. But when you deal with Anu instead of Anahazi, Anus are the ones that became the Anunnaki lines. They became very twisted up with the dark sun, black sun matrices. And it's not that one group of consciousness is good, one is bad. It's that one has its ascension codes and its ability to cognate the law of one and to therefore act humanely and lovingly, and the other has lost the ability to do that. And you don't lay yourself down before them and say, well, because you're higher evolution, go ahead, lead me. Because remember sharks. Sharks don't think about their food. They just eat it. Okay? We are energy systems down here. And the ones from higher evolution that are messed up perceive us like sharks perceive food. That's all. They don't realize we have something else besides that to offer. They don't care. We need to understand these things, what's going on, because it's affecting the indigo drama right now. It's also affected our ancient stellar history forever and ever. When we come down in harmonic 2, our race strain goes into the Syrian and Palladians. They were seated in both the harmonic 2 Syrian and Palladian race, planetary systems. The Azarites, which were the blue hominid that came out of the Anahazi, white, Syrian whites. Okay, then there was various race strains that came down here. Out of there, when we get down to about here, this was the Emerald Order. They're called Orifim. this is where the experiment was done, to try to take the coding, the primary coding of all the other interstellar races, put it into the basic Emerald Order imprint to create a new hominid line that the consciousness that was stuck in the other forms could build up codes enough to evolve into. So it could evolve out of the time matrix through what would become the human pattern. The first level of the human pattern started in harmonic 2 with the Emerald Order Orifeme. And Or refers to light. These were good guys. They had 30 to 48 strand capacity, that Emerald Sun matrix. Then they created a little smaller version of themselves in harmonic 2 still, plain old Orifeme. Okay? They had 24 to 30 strand capacity. Yeah, reduced it a little bit. Into the Orifeme were seeded the Turinicium, which were the 12 imprints from the other stellar races, and it created the full Turinicium 1 race. That's where it became Turinicium. Orifeme became Turinicium and human by adding the other patterns of the 12 races that needed help in their evolution. So we have the Turiniciums created now. Out of those came two primary divisions, and this is the story is told in the Secrets of Amente book a bit, where again the Anunnaki ones from over here and from over there, the middle guys and the really bad guys, interbred with some of the Turinicium, interbred with some of the Orifeme, which means you create some really high-coded, nasty beings. Yeah, there's a lot of heavy artillery created in the negative side by combining some of these very high-coded races with the distorted races. Like the Azrael, they were actually avian, getting the wing things from the Seraphi lines. They were blue, and they became with the dark angels in our history. They were the real negative dark angels that have messed with us for a very long time. So I showed some extra stuff that I don't have to cover here today on these charts, just so you see where some of the pieces fit. So if you hear somebody channeling Palladians, put up your Maharic seal, that pillar of light, before you go in, just in case they're transmitting frequencies that you don't want in your flashline sequences. Okay, now we get down here again. Orifeme came from Emerald Order, Orifeme, Turinicium. Turiniciums got messed up with the Anunnaki coding and became two races. They split into one that went into a reptilian type of human called the Bellicudium, and another that was a purified version, bringing the codes back to what the Orifeme were supposed to be, which is called the Adami Kudman. That was the pattern used, the Adami races. This is where stories of Adam come from. The Adami races were created. They were restructuring the imprint again and seeding it in 12 small pieces down here in harmonic 1. So the imprint could re-evolve down here, then we'd evolve back into the Adami Kudman, then we'd evolve into the Turinicium, then into the Orifeme, Emerald Order Orifeme. We progress all the way up to get our ascension codes back. When we understand this progression here, we can begin to understand where indigo children fit. Okay. We have indigo children here. These are a hybrid experiment that's taking place once again, because we have the higher ones of higher evolution realizing that right now we have some of these guys and those guys coming in here trying to hijack evolution. They're doing hybridization programs. Some of the UFO abduction stuff are by the negative groups, and they are trying to create hybrid versions of themselves to take over this place. Because they have the ability to do that if they want to. If there was no intervention, the human race on this planet would be hijacked again, completely out of its 12-strand capacity, forget its higher strand capacity. So there are arrangements being made where some of the negative sides are deciding they don't want to be so negative after all, and they're asking for help from some of the lighter sides. So there's negotiations being made all up and down the interdimensional scale. This is when the angels choose what side they're on, And it's coming down to hybridization programs running by each agenda here. We have the Elohim running their particular agenda, which is more interested in helping the Anunnaki races, since they were their Anu races, than helping the human race by itself. They don't want to hurt the human race. They're just willing to take the human and combine it with Anunnaki, realizing that the Anunnaki code is so strong that it will override the 12-strand. The Anunnaki will pick up the missing 12-strand and get its code, but it will unravel the human gene code back to a 10. It's not an evolutionary experiment that's in our best interest. It's in the Anunnaki best interest, but at our expense. That's why it's not endorsed by the Azurite Council or the Emerald Order. Because it's supposed to be win-win for everybody. In the law of one, there are win-win solutions that everybody can get what they need from. This matrix is not cooperating with that. Some of them are going to be coming over on this side the more weird things get between now and 2012 when it all comes to a head. Over there, they just want to take over the planet because they want the stargates that are at the center of this planet. They don't care what they have to do to the race here. They want one world order control. They're trying to do mind control here. And they're trying to hybridize a version of themselves here that can take over the planet. That's their only concern of the human lineage. It has codes that are compatible with the atmospheric conditions on Earth. They're trying to get that higher coding to bring in their higher levels of consciousness into form here so they can become the dominant force of this planet. Then we have these guys, the good guys over here saying, you know, these guys don't stand a chance if we don't intervene. And they have intervened. That intervention is the Indigo children. The Indigo children are hybridized gene code that, that involve the full coding that goes up. They're not just Adami imprint humans. They're not just Turnisium with the 12th strand. Some of them are Orifeme with 24 to 30 strand capacity. Some of them are Emerald Order. The Indigos returning. The Indigos coming into this race cycle where they normally would not belong, and the only reason they're being put here is because we're in big trouble if they don't come. This race will never again be able to reach its 12th strand if this evolutionary experiment isn't done now to give us back a real jump start in the gene code. You're not dealing with Turnisium souls incarnating here. You're dealing with Orifeme and Emerald Order souls incarnating here. What they are Elohai from Harmonic 4. These are avatars that are connected directly to their ascended master levels of consciousness. Some of them are Ekars. There are 3 types that we'll get into later after we come back from lunch. But these are not even what's considered human consciousness anymore. They're way back up the scale. They're incarnating avatars. It is the return of the Emerald Order that we are seeing in the Indigo children. And there is one group of them that are having the hardest time of all. And these are the ones that are getting a lot of problems with the ADD and all sorts of behavioral issues. And they can be living demons sometimes. And this is why. Type 3, which we'll talk about later a little bit more with the other types. Type 3 Indigo child is a very unique one. It's not just an Orifeme incarnating or an Emerald Order with the higher codes. It is an Orifeme avatar that has made an agreement with one of the races over here called the Nephilim. Okay, Nephilim pop up. Actually, they're running through these lines. They're also running through these lines. Nephilim were part human and part Anunnaki from the second seeding of our race down here. They were the giants that we talked about earlier. They, you know, the giants came. There were books of the Bible written on this that were destroyed. They came down, they interbred here, and they created physical beings here that were giants, and a whole bunch of them were kicked off the planet because they were going to totally erode the gene code here, and they were going to totally take dominion over the planet. That was not the plan. This was not supposed to be an Anunnaki planet. You know, they have their own. Stay off ours, you know. So, anyway, the Nephilim have been stuck in their own evolution. They have an 11-strand capacity, which is better than the dark matrix, but they're still not plugged into their avatar, full avatar level of consciousness, their Christos, and they cannot finish transmuting beyond that point. So they're a bunch of D11 avatars stuck. Where are they going to go? They can either join with these guys and continue sucking energy from other life forms and planetary systems, or they can start to realize they got a problem. And yes, you may be some of the most intelligent intellectual beings in the universe, but you don't know how to feel anymore because you don't have the frequencies because you're missing the DNA. If you want to evolve, you need help. There are agreements being made all up and down here. Hybridization programs that will allow the ones who want to cross over from either the very dark or the middle dark back into the ascension codes. Type 3 Indigo is a hybrid consciousness, not just gene code. It is 2 avatar identities in one body. They are literally 2 different families of consciousness. It's not just having, like, let's say with a walk-in, they're both out of the same family of consciousness, where you have one come in and raise the body for a little while, and that one ascends, and then you have the other one come in. They're all related. They have the same flash line coding. You're having 2 diametrically opposite flash line sequence coded beings coming into one manifest incarnation. It can create an extreme polarity problem, an extreme from one side to the other. You may be lucky and come out with an indigo that is absolutely angelic when it's a kid. It may turn into a person that has one of those diseases where they become raving lunatics when they're 60 years old because they get one of these diseases where they start to bark and all sorts of wild other stuff. The negative side will come out if these things aren't harmonized. The purpose for these type 3 indigos is to allow a new opportunity, a new race line of evolution for the Nephilim avatars who want to cross back over into the light, to have a new race line they can evolve through. And at the same time, it's helping us, because from all of our history that has been hidden for the last 200,000 years, where the Anunnaki came down and messed with the gene pool here, most of us have Anunnaki coding in us now, whether we want it or not. If we're going to evolve, some of us have so much Anunnaki coding that to get the 12th strand back, we need that intervention race too. By helping the Nephilim evolve, the Indigos are giving a place where the Nephilim and the human strains contaminated by Anunnaki can incarnate next into that form and start to clear out their codes and work out their polarity balances so they can then go into the Taurinicium imprint. What it will give the Nephilim is the ability to pick up that one extra strand. They have 11 strands. They'll be able to pick up the one extra strand. But their 11 strands are reversed. That fire letter sequence is turned around backwards. What this will do is turn it back around forward and give them the extra strand so they can finally ascend, hook up with the Rishi, and they're out of here. It will also help the humans whose gene code has been contaminated by the Anunnaki coding to do the same, piece by piece, lifetime by lifetime. But they come in with a huge burden of trying to balance the polarities of the universe within themselves. The Orifeme imprint is dominant, and that's the only way these avatars from the negative side get to come over. They have to agree to be in subservience to the little bit higher coded avatar coming in with the Orifeme. Now the Orifeme have much higher coding. They go from 24 up to 48 coding. That's the only level coding that would not get reversed itself by combining it with an 11-strand Nephilim. So you couldn't do it with a Taurinicium, a regular human. You had to go to the level above. Type 3 indigos, which are the predominant ones now. There's about 2,500,000 of them on planet right now. These are the ones that are having real problems with the energies, the chemical imbalances, the issues. They're here to resolve the polarity balances of the races. They have within them some of the highest avatar, and they have within them some of the most screwed up avatar. But they are avatars that are trying to balance that within themselves. Most of them will never become conscious of who they are on that level. They need help balancing the polarities. And we'll talk more about the other two types, which is much less scary. You know, I wasn't too thrilled to find out about type 3s. Like, oh no. You know, I've dealt with Nephilim before in other lifetimes in their pure form, and it was like, oh no, they're not quite as bad as draconian shark type consciousness, but they don't feel. They can like kill you and observe that as a scientific analysis. Oh, interesting, it responded this way. They just don't feel what they did. And some humans carry this too. They said, when I was asking, you know, the guardian matrices, they said that Jeffrey Dahmer was a type 3 indigo. He didn't do things to hurt people on purpose. He just had these urges that he had to fulfill, and it did something for him. He just couldn't get the concept of remorse because he couldn't get the concept of what he had done. That is a very characteristic sign of Nephilim consciousness. They came in here and mutated the heck out of our race and didn't even realize what the higher councils were mad at them. They didn't get it. You know, they're intelligent, but they don't feel the reality. You have this in an indigo body that's a type 3. And I'm going to be putting together a book on how to deal with the 3 different types of indigos. The other 2 are much more positive, and they're not as extreme. They don't have the negative, positive problems as much as these guys. But they have their own issues to deal with. We'll talk more about them, by the way, as you can imagine. But the important part of knowing about these things is without that framework, you're not going to understand indigo children. And without understanding indigo children, you're not going to understand what's happening here on the planet right now that affects everybody on this planet. We're going to be part of a very small group of people who actually get it, who actually have a clue as to what is going down here. And it's going to get stranger and stranger in the next couple of years because we're going through dimensional blend. More contact is going to be made. There's actually a possibility that as soon as by next year, the end of next year, you may have the Elohim crew with their ETs visiting. Staging a landing is possible. It's not decided yet. We have some pretty good spy matrices up there, so as far as, you know, finding out what they're going to do and when they're going to do it, we tend to be pretty current on the information. It's still an agenda that's possibly going to be done. It could get as weird as that, as early as next year. Imagine what that would look like. Imagine if all of a sudden you have the new president, on TV saying, interrupt this broadcast. Events of an incredible nature. The only thing I can compare it to is the incredible filmage they had from when the Hindenburg went down in history. You had that live broadcast of the guy in tears watching this thing explode in the sky. Well, it'll be kind of that level of intensity. The ships are landing. We are not alone. I can see the newscaster with the melodrama, and everybody glued to their TV sets. Oh my God, we're not alone. The scary part is, if that drama unfolds, it's not the guardians that are doing it. It's the middle ones that are coming out of the Elohim matrix that want to take human evolution away from 12 strand into the Anunnaki lines in order to quickly up-level the Anunnaki lines, even though it's at the expense of the humans. They're not trying to wipe us out. They're just inadvertently going to damage us more than they already did. What that scenario would look like if it unfolds is you would probably see simply one craft. And it would probably be done live on TV for effect, so everybody get it. And then there would be announcements as very human-looking visitors came off. They may be tall, taller than the average human, and they may be very blonde and very Nordic-looking. And if it happens to be those guys, they're from Nibiru. They're part of the Elohim Nephilim crew from Nibiru that messed with us all through our history and took out the books of the Bible, the other 12 that were supposed to be in there that told us how to ascend. And they will have names like Moses, Abraham, Jesus. And they will pretend, just like they did everywhere since 200,000 years ago, back again in 22,000 BC, they did it again. They will pretend they are our parents. You know that Bible you had? Well, we wrote it. You're our children. This is the line of BS they're planning to run here. If their agendas work well enough, if the planetary grid mechanics that we are working with aren't effective enough, quickly enough, where they still have the opening to get away with it, this is what they're trying to do. Do you know what they're already doing? They are manifesting images of religious figures floating down out of the sky. People have pictures of these. I think they're from Argentina or Brazil. I forget. Yes. And the people that are involved with this, I know a couple of these people, and I like them. I didn't have the heart to tell them that I'm sorry, it's not Jesus, really. It happens to be a Palladian Nibiruan that's coming down as part of a holographic insert program. They're not our enemies per se, but they're certainly not working in the best interest of us. They're like overprotective parents that decided they don't trust us enough to grow up, so they're not going to let us. That is not fair. That's why they are no longer members of the Guardian agendas. They're no longer members of the Guardian Alliance. So the whole Indigo issue is attached to the whole UFO visitation issue, is attached to what is going to go down here in the next 10-year period. Are we going to see it live on TV? And most of everybody else is going to be sitting around going, oh, neat, Jesus is back, just like the Bible said. It's like, if it were that simple, I'd be thrilled. But it's not that simple. These are plans of deception. What it all comes down to is we have a 12-strand potential as the general populations here. This is an opportunity to get that back, get back the awareness and the history that goes with it, and get back the mechanics to put our DNA back together. In the meantime, if we have too much skepticism and don't move quickly enough and say, well, I'm too busy, I have these things I have to do, I'll get to DNA later, I'll get to my evolution, maybe in 6 years or so, you just may find yourself as part of a mass program where all of a sudden there's human-looking beings claiming to be our forefathers interacting with society, particularly on the government levels, and you see this unity consciousness emerging, which unity consciousness in its true sense is fine. That's what we're aiming for. But you will see a pseudo-unity consciousness emerging, where if you don't buy the program, you become enemy of the state. If you don't buy the history that's going to involve a planet called Maldak, that's going to involve a twist on history they did in the Sumerian times, that changes real history the way it went down, makes them look like they came in and created us and took us from being apes and made us into humans. It's a whole false history that's coming out of the Nibiru matrix. This is what they did before. It's coming through channeling. You'll find it in channeling books. You'll find it on websites. There are certain I won't name them right now, but there is a certain very large contact movement happening with a Syrian strain. They claim to be guardians and ascended masters and a few other things. They are very sweet, love, light oriented. They are these guys, but they're not identifying themselves as the same Nibiru ones. They're working several angles with several different groups of contactees, but it's all the same primary agenda behind it, which is kind of mutate us into more Anunnaki cloister lineages, up the Anunnaki lineage, and keep us under mind control for however long it takes to get the Anunnaki where they want them. That's not the original agenda here. This DNA here is called the Templar Sun DNA. When I was talking about the Nephilim from before, this is the configuration they have, that 11 strand, but it's reversed where the fire letters are reversed, so they no longer plug into each other. So they can't undergo cellular transmutation. They're blocked because your fire letters have to be in right sequence in order for one strand to plug into the next, antiparticle and particle diffuse progressively up the thing to de-densify your matter. They're stuck in time. When we're doing the hybridization with them, these are the ones that agreed from that middle matrix that said, okay, okay. Long time ago when we made the decision to do these mutations down here, we see now it was a bad idea. Yeah, whoops. Help. They are asking for help. They're starting to at least to realize that what they did here, for one, was totally unfair to us, but it also inadvertently caused them a lot of problems too. They want to fix it. So they were given amnesty to the point where they're not under judgment, but they have to agree to work under the direction of one of the higher level Elohai families, the Orphim primarily. This is the matrix the Nephilim are coming in with. So when you have an Indigo level 3, which was literally 2 avatars coming into one body, you will have the 24 strand matrix of the Orphim mixed with that, the 11 strand reverse matrix. Progressively, the 24 strands will begin to reverse the polarity on the fire letters there. They'll match up because they have a lot of similar coding, and it will turn the negatives back into positives. But this whole process of the Indigo 3 lifetime is going to be about balancing polarities, because they're literally manifesting through the gene code, and that will manifest through the consciousness and the biochemical nature of the brain. Because what science doesn't realize yet is they look at DNA, they look at chemical imbalances, they look at the chemicals in the body. They don't realize these are the translations, chemical translations and manifestations of that deeper imprint. That's what they are. When they see DNA, it's simply a chemical translation of the morphogenetic imprint that's held in the scalar sequences. So they're not going to be able to figure out at all what is happening with any of the Indigo children, because there's a DNA thing happening here that's so far beyond what science is ready to deal with. They're going to be relatively useless in helping Indigos. They're going to be totally useless in helping what's going to happen if those guys actually do have the audacity to land. You know, they're already doing that. There's been landings, little private ones with little groups. Some happen out in Colorado, some happen in Arizona. Little isolated events that don't make it on the news, but you hear about them in the tabloids sometimes. You know, group in Arizona, you know, makes breeding contracts with, you know, ETs. Half of this stuff is nonsense. The other half isn't. That's what's scary. We're in a situation now in our society where we're being taught that what is reality is actually fiction, and we're being taught to live fiction. The reality of ET contact has been part of our history for 70 years. 70 years ago, there were contracts made. It wasn't Roswell, it was before that, with the Zeta races, who are coming out of the Draconian matrix. Were made with the U.S. government and several other governments. These are literal contracts signed. The MJ-12 groups evolved out of that. You don't find this in our history books for some reason. You know, oh, by the way, when the Zetas came down and decided they wanted to hybridize, and the government gave permission for that, so they let them abduct people as long as they erased their memory so they wouldn't remember it, so they could get the gene code. That's what's been going on here. These poor people that have been having contact and being abducted and being terrified by thinking they're crazy and going to psychologists, and the psychologists are telling them they're crazy. These people aren't crazy. They're being messed with. All right? But at least they're not the only ones messing. There's also people who are contactees that are Indigos, or they're going to be parents of Indigos. Indigos come in by something called a Palladorian birthing contract. If you have an Indigo child, you had a soul agreement, actually a Rishi level agreement, to serve the role of parenting an Indigo child here, which meant you would have to have certain accelerations in your own gene code, which means you would have at least, from the time you were a child, on the astral D4 level, direct contact with some of the guardian groups who would have been progressively through the astral body been activating the, portions of your DNA. So if you have indigo children, you have had contact. You just don't have the memory opened yet. So there's a lot to this story. If we can begin understanding it, we can begin positioning ourselves in a position of power to direct it in the best interest of everyone. Because we're not against Nephilim, we're not against Draconians, but allowing them to come in, take over, and deny the evolutionary potential that belongs to humanity doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help them either, as the Nephilim are now finding all of these centuries and centuries later. They're finding that because they mutated us, they're stuck too. They could have got that 12 strand back. They could have had the ability to interact with us and create a race strain within a win-win situation that they would have evolved long ago already too. So they're realizing the error of the ways. The Draconians are very far from realizing that. Now, I want to get into that's the matrix of the Nephilim that's being combined. What do we have next here? Okay, this is another. Wow. When we get into the Palladian Nibiruans, it's called the Axios Sun matrix. It's another DNA configuration. This one belongs to a lot of the ones that would be involved with that stage landing. Okay, they're connected to the other guys, but these guys have an extra problem. It's called the Templar seal, and it was put on them for messes they created before, where they just were not allowed to go higher until they went back down and reincarnated over and over and over until they clean up the messes they made. And this is coming out of they're Nephilim, but they're the ones particularly associated with the Palladian Nibiruans. And if you look through things, this might be a good time to start checking out, like, what's on the websites, all right, ET contactees, who's talking to what out there. You'll start to have an idea when you see who's talking to what that what is, and what agenda is behind what it's saying. Okay? These would be the guys that are most likely to make first contact, and to pretend there are ancient, Noahs and people like that. So if we understand, this is about DNA. This is about race evolutionary agendas. This is not some fluff-headed New Age picture. This has been going on all along. We need to realize it. Put the next one in, please. All right. These really small ones, they're just making indication of the seals in the DNA, which are distortions that were put in on purpose to change the way it was supposed to work, to block certain things, to control how consciousness would evolve. Our DNA came in with a lot of different types of seals. Some of them are described in Voyager's Amente book, and it gets really confusing. I mean, there's a lot of things, and this changed this, and the consciousness did this instead of this because you changed that. It's like, it's a science. We tried to touch on some of it. This is called the Belil Sun matrix. It's a 10-strand matrix, and there's a whole big movement going on now. Usually the people that are working with the Tree of Life that has 10 Sephiroth. The Tree of Life, as anybody doing Cathara healing knows, is about the DNA and about the Cathara grid within the body and about how that evolves into ascension. The people that are working to help people with this DNA configuration, humans here with this DNA configuration, are working with the 10 tree. We're working in Cathara with the 12 tree because we're working to regenerate the 12-strand pattern. These guys with the 10 tree of life are working with this DNA matrix because there's a huge amount of humans on the planet right now who have this DNA matrix because of interactions with the Anunnaki races throughout our history from Sumerian times and before Sumerian times. So the Belil Sun matrix has a 10-strand capacity. Now there are ways through the Melchizedek ordinations that anybody can get transmission of the 12-strand pattern. And they will at least have it when they didn't have it at birth. It's a morphogenetic field transmission. This is what we do the ordinations for. They're not about church. They're about DNA and ascension, okay? But the matrices involved with this are not being taught that that's an option, which again, Council feels is not fair. They should at least be able to be taught it's an option. It is felt with the matrices of Elohim that are connected to these guys too, that the consciousness isn't mature enough to handle itself. So they'll help them evolve, but this way, so they can still keep a rein on them. Now if you look at some people on planet Earth and how absolutely wacky they can be and how cruel they can be, would you really want them running around in 3 harmonics of the universe? It's bad enough there are 1 on 1 planet. So it's not a negative agenda, the ones that are working to, with the 10 tree. It's an agenda meant for a level of consciousness and a certain DNA matrix that will help them evolve to the point where they could handle themselves with the power that a 12-strand matrix will give them. They're the Belil sons. They have a lot to do with going back in time to some of the Jeshua lines. In the Voyagers book, we talk about the Christ story in a very unique way. We talk about the three Christs, the guy who was crucified who wasn't even a Christ, he was a decoy, and the two who ascended. One was a 12th level avatar, one was a 9th level avatar. The 12th level avatar was out of the Elohai families, and the 9th level was out of the Elohim families. Okay, we talk a lot about that. There's Jeshua 9s and Jeshua 12s, we call them, and they're family lines that came down because each of them left progeny. And each of them, yeah, there are Christ-like lines here, 2 of them. The Jeshua 9s tend to have this. These are the guys that are going to get kind of suckered in by the story of the Palladian Nibiruans, because they were directly involved with creating this mutation in the first place. So there's so many agendas here that are happening simultaneously with the DNA. If you're aware of them, you can at least have a choice in which one you're going to buy into. You can at least say, well, if our potential is 12-strand, well, I think we should have the ability to have that potential back. That's why I'm here. That's why the Orifim are here. That's why the Indigo children are here, to fulfill a promise that was made 550 million years ago with the Amente rescue mission. That was called the Covenant of Peleador, and the Ark of the Covenant referred to that, okay, to seeding the races. About 248,000 years ago, during a period that was called the Temple Wars period, that again you won't find in your history books yet, there was another covenant made after a whole bunch of messes, and 2 seedings went down the tubes, and again the same forces were fighting, and that's why the 2 seedings went down the tubes before. There was an agreement made called the Emerald Covenant, where a group of the interstellar races from all the harmonics who decided they would help humanity, reaffirm their position on helping humanity to get the 12-strand back. They made a promise. And the Emerald Order were the ones who, ran the whole thing from the higher harmonics, the Elohai families. And there's huge groups of interstellar races involved with each agenda, including the Emerald Covenant. Once upon a time, the Elohim Matrix was a part of the Emerald Covenant. Once upon a time, the Jeshua 9s were a part of the Emerald Covenant. But they decided to take it more into the Anunnaki evolution, and they broke the Emerald Covenant. So they're no longer considered a guardian group in the terms of guarding your right to have your heritage back. All right, so if you understand a little bit about how DNA applies to the agendas that are going down now, you get this bigger picture of reality that's going on. You also start to realize that humans have ET gene lines in them now, because there's been hybridization going on periodically. So we all have something called a DNA substrand matrix pattern. We're connected to one of these, or some of these, or a couple of these. We'll all have some of this stellar coding in us, and we will be most susceptible to the information broadcast coming through the ones that, the matrices that have the coding we have in our DNA. That's why the fact that you guys are in this room would probably imply you have the Elohai coding, because this is an Elohai transmission pattern, and you were drawn in and guided to be here by that frequency. There are the people, and there's a huge amount of them, they're going to be drawn into the Elohim matrix that have the Anunnaki distortions in the DNA. They're not being told about the other option available to them, and that's what's not fair. And guardian races are not going to intervene and wage war over it. It would just destroy the planet if they did that. But they are trying to make the option known, where if you do happen to have, from the J9 strains, if you happen to have Nephilim in your gene code, this is okay. It means the ascension process happens a little differently, and there's things that have to be done, but you can fix this. You don't have to go through another 2,000, 2 million years of evolution under somebody else's control to do it. So it's really just being aware. How much do you want to know? We feel that you throw it out there, and who wants to know will come. So we're doing that. All right, can we flip? Thanks. I need that one. All right, and the final one I was talking about, the draconian DNA matrix, it's called the Black Sun 10-strand reverse. They have 10-strand capacity, can pull in 10 dimensions of consciousness, cannot transmute form from one harmonic to another. But some of them, because they've crossed with some of the higher strains of the Elohai in various periods, can shapeshift to some degree. So you have dragons running around in human form. If you start seeing this is a phenomenon. I've had a number of people independently from all over different parts of the United States tell this one researcher who I know, who's like a researcher of UFO phenomena, I think I'm losing my mind because this person that I've known all my life, I was looking at them one time, they turned around and they turned into a lizard. They literally stood there and they were not a person anymore. They were a lizard, and then they turned back again, and I think I'm going crazy. They're not going crazy. Not all human bodies have humans in them right now. And that's going to be a rude awakening. That doesn't mean you hate some people and love others. That means you got to realize we have a really multifaceted problem here. Yeah. If you start to see weird stuff, like reptile faces popping out, even in etheric vision, where you just start to see reptiles inside certain people, you're identifying, your inner senses are picking up on this DNA matrix, the reptilian DNA matrix. They're most susceptible to being manipulated by the higher levels of the dark avatars. They can be fixed too, but their matrix doesn't tell them that. They're just taught, they're given belief programs of blind subservience. Just follow this doctrine, you know. They don't teach them anything about their energy fields. They keep them dumb, so they can use them here. But they're still human. Everybody here on this planet, this is the redeeming factor, came out of the Adami imprint originally, which was the Turnisium, which was the Orifeme, which was the Emerald Order, okay? We all still have a seed of that left, even if you have a black sun matrix. It may take a while to reverse something like this, but it can be done. If you know the option exists. Those people that have, human beings right now walking around with us, who have some portion of this or even all of this, there are literal race lines among us that have this DNA configuration. They don't know it. And it's a good thing it's not common knowledge, because everybody would be really trying to kill each other, pointing fingers at each other. You have a black sun matrix. Yeah, it's not about that. Black sun matrices, Bolero matrices, all these DNA matrices can be fixed and restored. All it comes down to is understanding fire letter sequences and what fire letter sequences need to be repaired and reordered. When you're working with the ELO high councils, they know the mechanics of that. They have the programs, the original ones. And that's what they're bringing back here. That's what the Indigos coming here are about. They're resetting in the grids, in the earth grids, in the race morphogenetic field, the original pattern of that first seed race in harmonic 4, and then in harmonic 3, the Anahazi, that everything else came out of. They're resetting that pattern here. So no matter what mess you have in the gene code at this point, you can plug in to the ascension codes and start getting your coding back, your flashline sequences back. That's the highest agenda working on the planet. Okay, we can go past that. All right, I think we showed that one before, yeah. That is the imprint, the 24th strand, and it's like 24 to 30 strand capacity of the Orifeme. That's not the Emerald Order Orifeme, that's the Orifeme. That would represent the matrix of indigo number 2. Type 2 indigos are incarnating ancient souls. They're not incarnating from here. Usually when you die here, you go up to about D4 frequency, reincarnate back down from D4. These guys are incarnating from the 24th to the 30th frequencies of consciousness. And they have to go through a whole interesting process to do that, to downstep into a body pattern down here. So type 2 indigos will have this DNA matrix. They are here on world service missions, and they are also here to help reset and hit critical mass of the right flashline sequences within the race morphogenetic field for the DNA, because if there's enough of them and there's a strong enough concentration of the right sequence patterns, it will flip over a lot of the mutations in the race morphogenetic field for the DNA. We're all connected through our morphogenetic fields, the scalar patterns. We're all part of the Earth's morph field, and we're all a part of the universal morph field. But when we bring it down to us as an individual, is connected to a collective, a family, is connected to a race, is connected to the planet. So they're coming in, indigo 2s are coming in to give back the 12-strand pattern here by having double that. So every one counts as 2, as if there were 2 to reset that pattern. They're trying to hit critical mass. So the potential 12-strand is given back to this race before the other guys get a chance to hijack it again. All right, and then we'll get to level 3s now. All right, that is the Emerald Sun, 48-strand DNA matrix. And they're really beautiful. Like, you know, like when you start to realize these are frequencies of consciousness, it's like filling out the frequencies. And when you see little scrawny suns, you realize you have limited consciousness. And when you have something that looks like that, you have 48 levels of consciousness, focused and aware. These beings have the potential to be awesome, But they can't come in with all of that activated, or they'd totally blow up a fetal pattern. It's a process getting into a fetal body. With the Emerald Order Oraphim, which are the ones that were the original Elohai, they're literal incarnations of the Elohai, not just avatars, but ascended masters levels. They come in from their non-manifest states in the ultra-terrestrial level, come down into the meta-terrestrial level, and progressively work their way down into where they can incarnate here, in pieces, because you can't fit it all in a human body, it would blow it up. This is the potential they have. Now, the human imprint down here can't hold more than 12 dimensions of consciousness. With a matrix like this, or even the 24 pattern, they can open up to the avatar level, full 12-strand activation, and then they can access the rest of their consciousness. They can't fully embody it and focus it here, but they can move their consciousness up and pull information. They can read the whole 15-dimensional matrix and up to the Akadic level. So they can pull very pure information. Now, these are the level 1 indigos. They come in usually not even so much just to help critical mass in the DNA for the 12-strand. They're coming in on planetary grid work projects. And very often their whole life is just about that. You know, they just kind of disassociate from other things. They're not as sociable as the type 2s. And they're not, the type 1 and 2 are not as rambunctious as type 3s, that have the polarity issues to deal with more. When they come in, they have the ability to awaken to be ascended masters. That doesn't mean they will. If the gene code doesn't activate properly within the right time frames, they won't be able to fully actualize their potential. That's where we come in. If we're aware of what's going on here and we start to create situations in our culture that will give them the framework they need to awaken quickly, they will be fine. They're here to make sure this planet doesn't go into pole shift between now and 2017. And they won't even be grown up by then. They're just here as an energy field. Because right now we have stargates opening, whether or not we believe in them yet. They're real. They're at the planetary core, and they're called the Halls of Amenti. They haven't opened in 200,000 years, 210,000, 216 years. They are opening now. They will open in 2012, between 2012 and 2017 for a brief period of time. If that opening does not go properly, if the flash line sequences in the planetary grid are off, it will create pole tilt. And this is why the type 1s are coming in fleet. They can rebalance the planetary grids because they can hold the literal flash line sequences all the way up to the Akadic level if they're activated. They can reset that into the planetary grids to correct any planetary grid blockages that would create pole shift. When we do our trips to Egypt and Peru and these kind of things, this is what it's about. Unfortunately, I'm not going on vacation. I would love to. We're going there to run the frequency of these codes back into the planetary grid to make sure that as the vortice is open, which they are doing now, the 7 seals that they talked about in the Bible, seal 4 opens on 5/5/2000, May 5th. That's at Giza. We just recoded that manually because if we didn't, that would have begun the pole shift. There's a lot of channel groups that are talking about, yes, in 2003 the pole shift starts. That's when it would have started. All right. Correction. We recoded that one. Next is Peru. So what we're doing is the mission of the Emerald Order. It's very intense information. It's not baby level at all. We weren't supposed to have this information here for another 2,000 years. But the planet wasn't going to make it to that point. So this was the crash course, tell them as much as they can handle to get this grid work done. And they'll be okay. And that's what's being done. That's why I'm out here giving information. There's going to be more people like me talking about this as they start their awakening cycles. Okay, so when we're dealing with type 1s, we're dealing with this, the 48-strand Emerald Sun DNA matrix. And what's interesting about this matrix is to have that level of consciousness incarnate into a fetal pattern, it has to be done in 2 pieces. It has to be done through a walk-in process. And this is another thing that you go to a psychologist and again they think you're a split personality or you're nuts or whatever. You're not. A walk-in is a literal process where one soul starts the fetal pattern, does fetal integration, raises the body to a certain level, and then they have soul agreements that, okay, I'm done with what I needed to learn here, and this one didn't want to have to go into a body or couldn't go into a body until a certain age. They switch. They literally switch. One goes into ascension, pulls its fire letter sequences out, while the other puts theirs in, and it recodes the body. It's very precise. It's very tight wiring issues. and it's orchestrated from higher levels. All of the type 1s have to do the walk-in process, or they cannot activate to be first the avatars and then the ascended masters that they are. If they don't undergo the walk-in process, they will be stunted into no more than a 12-strand activation level. And again, there's timing factors. Certain things have to happen by like age 12, certain things by age 22, certain by 33, and if they don't fulfill their potential. These are a group of children here that are here, and a group of adults too, that to finish what they intended by coming, they're going to have a whole different school system. They're going to have classes that teach them about their biofield, teach them about find who you are. You're somebody else, find it. You know, you're not just you when you look in the mirror. There's more to you. Find you. They need this assistance so they don't get in the brainwashing program that we're taught in public schools here. Or they will never be able to reach this potential, which means they won't get the grid work done, which means this race may not have to worry about it after 2017. It's not baby games anymore. It's not a fear thing either. As long as we can accommodate what the Indigos are here to do, it'll work out fine. We're scheduled to win this round. 200,000 years ago, the last time the stargates opened, we lost. It went into pole tilt then. And when things balanced again, the negative sides took over. Well, the negative ones and the middle grounds, and they've been fighting here ever since. And every time some of the Elo high families tried to come in, they would wipe out their information, bringing the ascension teachings, and they would wipe out their populations whenever possible too. We're in a unique position in history, and the Indigos are leading the way, and if we help them, they'll lead us back to the victory of our own heritage. That's what it's about, and that's the level we need to understand. This is not small stuff. We need to build places where these Indigo children and the parents that are going to be carrying them can go for safety, for shelter, for new understanding of what's happening here, so they can begin to activate, so they don't go into having to have Ritalin to control their behavior because their biofields are short-circuiting. Because even the ones with the high strand coding can have that problem too. Many of the type 3s are the autistic children. About 99% they said of autistic children are type 3s, where the negative one tried to take over the body and the orifeme shut it down. And it just won't. So it freezes the whole ability to communicate, and the outside personality just goes into terror. There's this war going on inside, and it can't even fathom what's happening to itself on a conscious level. So there are diseases. SIBS is another one, sudden infant death syndrome. This is mostly Indigos, of all the types, where they get to a certain point in the fetal body and they realize they're not going to be able to activate the gene code the way they had intended. They're not going to be able to do what they came to do, so they leave, and they look for another body as quickly as possible. This is the thing science doesn't understand yet. I mean, they look at this, oh, what's causing this horrible problem? Well, sometimes the horrible problem happens to be a choice by the soul that's trying to incarnate in there. And parents need to understand this, too. I'll save time for questions later, though. I just want to... Okay.
What I want to tell you is that they are also using the Indigo in order to be hosts for Indigos without them coming out into the world as human beings.
Right.
Yes.
You mean they're using him in overshadow?
You know, like a human being like me, for
Yeah.
instance, I can be used as a host to have the Indigo inside of me.
Yeah.
And it functions that way without coming out into the world.
Yeah, some of them will do overshadow. That's called overshadowing, and what that is, I've done this before in my incarnations. I haven't been in a full physical incarnation since Miriam's period back in the biblical days, but I have had numerous experience of overshadowing one of the other souls in my soul matrix that incarnated. And she would go into fetal integration and get into the gene code, and I'd come down into the astral field and make the link between the astral field and the higher levels of consciousness. So she had her interior guidance system open, you know. So I practiced for this life by doing that for a while. This time, I came in through this. I haven't activated all that yet. That's my potential, and if I keep wiping myself out with overwork like this, I'm never going to get it activated. It's not about ego. It's not about who's got a better gene code, you know. It's about what did you as a high being, because we all are ascended masters. We all started there. What do we come to do here? We all came to do something. Now, with this gene code, the issues for children, it's an issue because walk-in can be a challenging experience. You'll also have bleed-through from a very early age between the experiences here and in the anti-particle universe because they have the coding open between them. So they get two sets of memories running concurrently. They may also be birthing in with much of their incarnational memory running before their eyes, before they can even talk. They know they came from somewhere else, but they don't know what that means, and they get out here, try to understand, and they're hit with frameworks of reference that cannot explain them to themselves. That stunts their awakening process. It makes it very, very hard for the indigos to awaken. That's why many of you in this room may be indigos. You may be the type 1 indigos. You just never got to the point where you could understand what that meant or how to find it. Knowing this information may begin that opening for you, where you could start to feel it. Okay, I think I'm an indigo. Might I be 1, 2, or 3? You know, I'm going to do a book, not a 2-year publishing job book, but one of the spiral-bound ones specifically. I'm very detailed how to spot these characteristics. If I try to do it in a short form and stick some little dinky things in the chart pack, there's some references there, but there are a lot of characteristics to look for with each of these types. I'm going to do a book. It's probably going to be for mail order for anybody who wants it within the next couple of months, that specifically how to handle the indigo situation. If you think you are one, if you know one, what to do for indigos in general, you know, what the kids that are spotted with different disorders. There are certain physical disorders that are very characteristic. Like these kind come in, often asthma. They come in with asthma as a baby. Oftentimes they come in as jaundiced infants with the yellowing of the skin, the liver's not functioning properly. Often they have spleen problems. There's all sorts of different things. The body's here, or the body patterns here that they get, that fetal imprint from the parents' imprint, is not quite ready to handle that level of frequency. So there are adjustment issues that come in with all of them. I'm going to do a detailed rather than just try to throw it at you, oh, you know, this, and this, and you can spot one. It's not that easy. But once you see how the characteristics fall, you will be able to start walking around and you'll see these children. And that's when you're empowered to help them. They're all good. The ones even with the Nephilim. They have the real challenge because they don't get to activate all of their strand capacity. They're just here to have the capacity to reverse the negative Nephilim matrix. So they don't get the glory of being able to turn into 12th level avatars and, like, you know, go through portals. They're not going to reach that this life, and they're not supposed to, and that's okay. Some of them may die early. Some of them may get into drug abuse to numb themselves from the internal conflict. They need a lot of help and support, love, and nurturing is what they need. It's not even going to help them to understand this stuff. It's way over their heads. They're going to be too trapped in the surface conflicts. So you'd handle them one way. Then there's the other two who need to wake up as fast as possible because they came here to be avatars and ascended masters. Not to say, I'm an ascended master and walk around with their nose in the air. They came here to say, excuse me, I got to go do planetary grid work. Sorry, you know, can't go to the football game right now. You know what I mean? We really need to create an awareness where we can accommodate these children. There's 155,000 of them coming in between now and 2017. They're just the infants. There's a bunch of them here already. And they're not awakening yet because they don't have a framework to awaken in. So if we can begin to create those frameworks for them, they will begin to awaken, which will help them do the grid work they need to do as far as these guys go. So hopefully we won't be like a handful of people trying to make sure the planetary grids don't go into reversal. Yeah, there's strength in numbers. The more people that are working with setting the patterns of the grid right, the more chance of shifting out of the potential of pole tilt we have. We don't have to see pole tilt if we're ready to wake up. All right. Now, okay, a couple quick points I want to make with the incarnational heritage is, you know, we're in, most of the people on the planet, I will say instead of we in this room, are of the Aryan root race cycle. They have the 3rd and 4th DNA strand activation job. Okay? The indigos come in from much higher levels than the astral plane, where most of the Aryan souls come in from. They come in from, as I was saying, the Rishi level and the Ascended Master level. All right, so here, first of all, they're completely different levels of consciousness. They're not astral awareness at all. They have astral awareness, but they are just beings of, they can be, if they activate, beings of a magnitude that is awesome. And there's no ego involved with that. Ego is a lower, like, you know, kind of neophyte characteristic. We find out, oh boy, I have a big gene code, I'm somebody important. That just means you didn't realize you were somebody important, which means you didn't have your gene code activated enough to know everybody's important. You know? So if you're still stuck in a thing of some people are better than others just because they have higher levels of development, that's still an ego issue. That means you don't get that we're all equal in value from the smallest to the largest. You don't get the law of one yet. And that means if you're an ascended master claiming that and you're still having those value judgments, you're showing that you're not. You know? And there's a lot of that going around these days. Okay. let's see. Okay, for the parents of indigos, this is where ET contact comes in. But ET contact on the D4 level, through the dream state usually first, sometimes from childhood. Parents will be involved with oversoul and rishi contracts to have the indigos, and they will be prepared for that through at least astral level out-of-body type of experiences through childhood. Some will have, many of the ET people, the contactees, are really experiencing the fulfillment of their Palladorian birthing contracts. They're getting their gene codes amped up, but they don't understand it yet. They don't understand what it means or why this seems like a dream, but it's not a dream, and how did they take me through that wall? You know, I'm physically solid, and so is the wall. They don't have the framework yet to understand that if you change the oscillation rate of the body, you can literally make it walk through walls down here. It's all vibrational relationships, and the ETs know how to do this. And I don't even like the term ET, because it makes you think of little green Martians. And I don't particularly like the term angel, because it makes you think of big things with wings that are much more important than you are, that you have to bow down in subservience to. Both of those terms are misleading. Both of those terms set you up for manipulation. If you look at them both as visitors from other worlds and higher levels of evolution, frequency-wise, it brings them all down into perspective. Now, forget the spaceships, laser guns, and feathery wings. Let's get down to who are these people. Okay? We need to stop looking at ourselves as little, lowly, sinful humans and these big, wonderful angels, half of whom are on the dark side. The other half are okay. There are winged beings out there. But they're winged because they're of an extraterrestrial strain that happens to have wings. You know? Like, nobody ever seems to make the connection between angels' wings. Why do angels have wings? Because God gave them wings. Well, yeah. How? Genetically. How? Through a race of beings that has wings as their genetic imprint. They are not of this planet, therefore they are ET. They're interchangeable terms. And we need to reinterpret how we look at things with this angel ET thing. Angelic consciousness is really between D6 and D9. Angels aren't that high up on the totem pole. You have the ability to bring in D6, D9 consciousness if you activate your gene code. If you get the 12 the pattern, transmit it back into your field, and progressively work to activate it in the Kundalini, you can be angels embodied, because you all have a level of angelic consciousness. So we're learning to reperceive the whole structure. You know, forget bound down to things with wings just because they have wings and they claim to be from God. We're from God too, you know? So let's equalize it a little. Respect where it's due, but not to the point of blindness where we can be easily blindsided. Now, let's see if I want to cover anything else on here. Powder and birthing contracts. Yeah. Yeah, we covered most of that. Okay. All right, this is the visual difference between the contemporary human DNA and the small Orifeme 24 strand indigo type 2 DNA. That's not even the type 1s that have the 48 strand capacity. Here we have the potential of having, if we get the transmission to receive the morphogenetic imprint for the cloister race strands, this would be the 12-strand diamond sun matrix. Right now, most humans on the planet have 1, 2, 3 strands activated, and they're just beginning to activate strand 4, which they have the birth imprint on. These strands, they didn't even have the birth imprint on, unless they happen to be of a cloister race strain. The Melchizedeks are coming in now, too, which are a cloister race that goes with the next root race that's not here yet. They have strand 5 on the birth imprint, but they don't have strand 6. None of them have strand 6 right now, even the Melchizedeks, unless they get a full induction of the 12-strand pattern, which is a process of ordination that takes place when you're dealing with the higher Elohai councils and that kind of thing in the Melchizedek priesthoods. You come down here, the level 2 indigos come in with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 strands activated. At birth, they're coming in with that. But strand 4 is not plugged in yet. So their process, they have the full strand in 1 through 3 active, and strand 5 and 6 active. Part of strand 4, the higher part, their first years of life are the process of activating strand 4. By the time they hit 12, 4 finishes, 5 and 6 plugged in. You have a fully integrated soul by age 12. Usually, if the human imprint was working the right way with the 12-strand pattern, A normal 12-strand being would begin soul integration, 4th, 5th, and 6th strand activation at age 12 and finish it at 22. These guys begin it at birth and finish it at age 12. By 22, they can be embodied oversouls. By 33, they can be embodied avatars. This is what their potential is if we help them. And it's worth helping them because they will teach us so many things. The information I'm bringing in now is nothing compared to what some of these guys are going to be able to reach if they are able to get their coding straight. So, okay, we can move past that one. Okay, this many of you may have seen. It's the level of, in fact, I don't even need that. I only have the graph up. It's easier to just describe it on the graph. This is in the charts too, just to remind us here of something we've had in some of the other workshops, where understanding the levels of personal identity that go with the 15-dimensional structure. Some people that haven't been here before haven't seen this, so I'll really quickly go over it. We have, again, the 15-dimensional structure here, and then the 3 levels of non-dimensionalized energy matrix. In harmonic universe 1, D1, 2, 3, we have the incarnate identity. This is our identity structure, and this is what the indigos need to know. They need to be raised with a model that shows them where their parts fit so they can begin to very aggressively activate their parts. And as long as they know the parts are there, they don't get lost in confusion. So in harmonic 1, we have our incarnate self. In harmonic 2, dimensions 4, 5, and 6, we have our soul, or our soul matrix. There's a tangible structure to the soul, which is the name of the tape program I have back there that begins Kundalini activation. It is made out of scalar waves, just like everything else. And there's no difference between the stuff your leg is made out of and the stuff your soul is made out of. This is your identity that they forgot to tell you about in health class, okay? This will help you to become who you were supposed to be, who you wanted to be when you came here. And this is a model that will help the indigos become who they intended to be by awakening. This is the awakening model. It will teach you, if you work with it, and the mechanics that go with it, how to activate your DNA, go into soul integration, which is bringing this level of identity into your incarnate body. Then there's the oversoul in harmonic 3, D7, 8, and 9. After you integrate this, then you would bring in this level of identity. And remember, these are frequencies of consciousness, scalar waves, flash line sequences. You're bringing them into the body, into the DNA. You're expanding your consciousness into those levels. You have the avatar level in harmonic 4. This is where you finish your 12-strand pattern. This is the capacity right here of harmonic 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 12-strand diamond sun DNA matrix. You come out here to the Rishi identity, which takes you back out of pre-matter liquid light and really into just wave form. You're back to pure scalar form. It's not as dimensionalized as the stuff down here. There's still dimensions, but they're changing that form already, where you're not even in pre-matter. This is the capacity of the double diamond sun 24th strand of the Orifeme, Indigo 2. They would be able to, when fully activated, embody all of this, like the 12 strand can do, embody all of this of the antiparticle double as well, which the 12 strand embodies some of it. There's like, this would get into levels of analysis of the morphogenetic field of universal structure that I don't have time to do right now, where you have sets of 15-dimensional matrices and parts of consciousness stationed in each of them. I won't even go there right now. But this is the capacity to become a Rishi, of integrating all of that to become an avatar, all of the double version of that avatar to become a Rishi, which would look like a sun. It's a glowing ball of light when perceived from lower dimensions. I won't even go there as far as when we look up in the sky, what do we see? We see glowing balls of light. What might that mean? If all things are consciousness? That's a couple of the questions I'm still trying to put into a perspective that can be understood. But when we get to Rishi level consciousness, we are a spherical identity. We have integrated all of the frequencies, fire letter patterns. This is the capacity of Indigo 2. And out here, integrating those 3 levels of ascendant mastery is the capacity, if activated, of the Indigo number 1, the Emerald Sun, 48 strand DNA matrix. Why these guys are important on the planet now? Most of them won't even do education programs like I'm involved with right now. Most of them will be probably quite reclusive and just go do the thing they came to do. They are able, because of the coding, to pull frequency literally from the Akkadic matrix, which is this final level before you expand into source. Pull direct current all the way through like a beam of light, all the way through all the dimensional fields down and ground it into the Earth field. That will reset the grids for the whole planet, not just for the people on it. So that's their mission. That's why they're here. And it may manifest in some strange ways. They may not know about it. And if they don't go through this awakening process, they're not going to know about it in time. But their higher parts still know about it. Even if they haven't integrated them, they will begin to beam the frequency through them anyway, even if they're not consciously aware that, oh, gee, I came in with an indigo contract, you know. If they can't get that far, they will beam as much of that really high frequency in to recode the planetary grids, to make sure we go through this Stargate cycle peacefully, without any major messes happening on the surface. Okay. We can flip that. Okay, over here I can read this better. See what points I want to point out here. Okay, this is where I was explaining the age differences as far as we see those identity levels. We realized basically DNA activation is the process of progressively doing first soul integration, then over soul integration, then avatar integration, then as a 12-strand you're out of here and you can go into Rishi integration on the higher levels and full ascension. So this is the basic process of our evolution that for some reason we've forgotten with a lot of help. If we understand that, then we can start to realize there are levels that were normal levels when this was supposed to happen, when the 12-strand pattern was activating the right way. Could you put the next graph on it? Okay. Contemporary humanity, right now, the soul integration process, they're born with strand 3 active. The 4th is blocked at age 12 because of the mutations in strand 4 through 6. It's blocked. It doesn't happen. And what happens? We remain 3-dimensional consciousness. We remain trapped, phase-locked into 3D. And what this does is back up the metabolic rate. It backs up the biochemical hormones and all of that and turns the body into something it wasn't meant to be, and it starts to self-consume. It starts to degenerate itself at the age of 12. It sets in motion the death hormones that begin the process of eroding the cellular structure. That was not how the original pattern was intended to work. What normally was supposed to happen was between age 12 and 22. You come in with strand 3 activated. Between age 12 and 22, you would begin to activate strand 4 through 6. And by age 22, you wouldn't go through these weird emotional changes and stuff that happen in adolescence here. They happen because all the chemicals back up, and they can't do what they're supposed to do, which is complete integration of the 4th through 6th dimensional aspects of consciousness. That's how we're supposed to be working here. So by 22, we're supposed to be able to be fully embodied souls, have 6-dimensional instead of 3-dimensional consciousness. By the age of 33, between 22 and 33, we work on oversoul integration, which is 7th through 9th dimensional consciousness. And if we were working the right way, between age 33 and 44, we would finish integrating our avatar identity. The body would not die. It would transmute to the next harmonic. You would be able to get mastery over the matter density process. That was our heritage. That's what we're trying here with the Emerald Covenant to give back to humanity. And that's what the other ones are trying to not get you back. Because if you get back to that point and you realize, wow, look what happened here, look what they did to this race, we might not be real happy about it. And that's some of the reason why some of the ones that are still trying to repress us here, they don't want to contend with what they might unleash. If we get this back and realize how badly we were treated. Because they think in terms of abuse, they're afraid that if we get the power, we may treat them as badly as they treated us. And they know enough about the law of reciprocity to realize that there's probably a good chance for that to happen with some of us. They don't want it to happen. Now, with indigo human hybrids, which they are hybrids, they will have soul integration, the strand 5 and 6 activation at birth, and then 4 activates from birth to age 12. So full soul integration happens by age 12 unless there's genetic blockages. Now, when a soul of any kind integrates into the fetus, that fetal pattern is created by the flashline sequences of mom and dad put together. If there are distortions in those patterns, that fetal pattern has distortion. So the incoming soul, no matter how high it is, will pick up those distorted flashline patterns. This is what's a problem for all of the indigos right now. Even if they have their coding, fine. As soon as they hit that fetal pattern for integration, they have distortions occurring. One of the first things they need to do And this is why, the biggest reason why Cathara healing is being introduced. They need the Maharic recoding process by which the 12th dimensional pattern is reactivated here through the Maharic shield, which is a scalar grid that opens below the feet once you know how to work the Kundalini systems. That will reset and clear out very rapidly any of the distorted flash line patterns, aka DNA mutations, that have been set from the parents. So they can get that out of the way and then get on with their soul integration process. So by age 12, they can hold 6 dimensions of consciousness. Between 12 and 22, they do over soul integration. By age 33, they can ascend. They are masters. They are 12-strand avatars, if they're given the opportunity to understand this structure. Right now, you send these indigo children into contemporary society, peer pressure alone is enough to get them to not want to know. Because once you teach them this stuff, do you think you can send them to public school? Good luck. If they don't get beat up constantly by the consciousness around them because they're so obviously different, they'll be harassed by the teachers. Plus, they don't handle the authority of the teachers well at all. They know more. They sense that they know more. Don't you tell me. This is not right. The authority is an issue for indigos because they have a higher authority, their own connection to source. And they feel it, even if they're not awakened to what it means yet. And if you try to violate that, or if you're in a system that violates that, they're going to push back. They'll act out. They'll avoid. They'll go through a whole set of reaction patterns. Because more than an average human who only has 3 dimensions of consciousness that really doesn't feel the difference. These guys feel the difference. They know in other reality systems it doesn't work this way here. They know when something's out of line. And they will react to that much more than a child who is not an indigo. So literally, there are school systems that are going to be needed to be set up for these children that teach a whole new paradigm. And unfortunately, because right now there's a lot of messy things happening with the Illuminati underground in our governments, just watch what happens to any overt movement to try to create schools for indigos and see how fast regulations and repression happens to anybody who tries to. And it's about teaching people how to activate that and actively begin using the earth energy, connecting with the earth energy, opening the 12th chakra, pulling it up, activating that shield in the planetary grid, then drawing energy up, 12th dimensional frequency, to recode the whole Cathara level of the body, which is the core template, which will recode the chakra system and the auric field and eventually the matter pattern and the DNA. This is the fastest process for recoding DNA. That's why it's being given. It's not just another healing system. You know, it's more than another healing system. This is a system of ascension. But it's also a system that is going to be needed when working with indigos. If you understand the Maharic recoding process, you will know how to help indigo children, how to help indigo infants. You can do this on pregnant mothers before they even come out to help the indigo children harmonize. You can do it on yourselves to begin and activate your own process of protection. Because it will, when you do this and that you create this activation in the shield, it turns into a pillar of 12th dimensional frequency that runs all the way up between your avatar identity, through you, and down into Earth's core, which means you can't be messed with on the intermediate frequency levels. All those little mind control programs they're trying to run, you'll block them out. You'll be aligned with your higher identity. That's why this level is being given here. There's too much at stake. So for the people who can grab it and run, the knowledge is indigos. We have indigo recessive. That is the type 3 that has 2 avatars in one body, the Nephilim and the Orpheum. That's type 3. That's the most common type. Okay? At least presently. Most of the ones coming in the next, between now and 2017, are going to be type 2 and type 1. And there'll be more type 1 coming in toward 2012. Because right now the planet can't hold too much of that frequency because they bring that, even though it's not plugged into the DNA, they bring in their morph field huge amounts of frequency that if you put too many on the planet, when the planet's at this rate of growth itself, you can actually blow the grids. So these are all contracted. If 3 billion of these Emerald Order wanted to come in all at once, they're not allowed to because they'd fry the system and blow the planet up. Energy is energy, whether it's in a body or in a planet body. And it's all about energy relationships. So the type 3s are the most common right now because they're the ones that have the lowest frequency of the bunch of them because they're counterbalanced. If you take the 24-strand capacity of the Orpheum and combine it with a -11 capacity of the Nephilim, it basically comes out to a +12. they have the capacity to activate 12 strands. Most of them won't in this life. So they're not pulling in as much frequency as the other two types. They're doing their own little help. The evolution program is important what they're doing, but they don't have to worry about running as much frequency as the other two do. Next type is the type 2. It's the indigo dominant. It's the next most common type. Again, it has more frequency running through it than the type 3, but not as much as the type 1. Okay? They've been coming in for 75 to 100 years in little dribs and drabs here, mostly since the 1950s when it was realized that things were going to get really weird here. All right. There are about 500,000 indigo dominants right now, and another 130,000 between 1999 and 2005. So these guys are coming in soon. These are little babies. Some of them may turn out blue. Some of them may be accidentally pyrokinetic. Those kind of things. Like if you happen to have, a grandchild or something, and you see it laying in its crib, and all of a sudden the teddy bear from across the room levitates and ends up in the crib. No, you're not watching Samantha and Tabitha on Bewitched. You're watching what an indigo can do by accident. It just wished it and it happened. Most of them, because the fourth strand is not plugged in at birth, will not have that happening. But once in a while one slips through where there's more fourth strand activation, so that means more of the fifth and sixth are plugging in, which starts to give them some really odd abilities, like that accidentally starting. The composites, these are indigo composites. They're composites because they have to come in through a walk-in experience. When you have one of these, it can be very interesting, because usually if the codes are going right, by about age 12, you're not dealing with the same child anymore. Same overall being. It'll come in from its own oversoul level, but it's not from the same soul matrix. So literally, the souls change places. Same oversoul, but not the same soul. Different personality. You may find subtle changes, or you may find abrupt. Used to be an artist, now it's a mathematician. Used to love horses, now can't stand them. You may notice subtle or extreme shifts with these children, and it's okay. It's part of the walk-in process. It can be very confusing for them because there's still that part of the personality, the ego, the focus is out here going, I don't feel like me anymore. Something happened. Walking in is a whole experience unto itself. I could do a whole workshop on what that is and how to make it less troublesome than it can be. These are some of the skills that we're going to need to help these children to get to their potential, and they'll help us too. Because the more you work with indigos, the more frequency starts coming through their energy fields, and they become walking transmitters, and their codes will stimulate your DNA codes. So you will grow more rapidly and clear more quickly by working and being close proximity to indigos. It's you give to them, they'll give to you, without even thinking about it consciously. It's an energy thing that happens. Okay? And the most important thing, really, that we've got to realize, this whole UFO movement, contactees, abductees, that they make a very, very strong campaign through the media and the press and the psychology movement and everything else, that this is just hallucinations of, fringe people. Yeah, fringe of the mind control program. Fortunately for them, these are directly involved with the indigo birthing contracts. You have indigos coming in as hybrid souls. They're also hybrid gene codes, because most of the indigos, particularly types 1 and types 2, the mothers have to have alterations to the fetal pattern done. They will be abductees. They may not remember it yet. That memory will be in there someplace in one of their DNA strands and cellular memory. If it would be too traumatic, that memory will be blocked. Your own soul blocks it. Only when you're ready will you know if you've been a contactee. And if you were, it started in childhood, which means you had that contract while you were a child. It was already decided. For this time frame, it knew that it was a potential that these things would, evolve. Most of the contactee people are involved with indigo birthing contracts. The other group are involved with, not because they want to be, but with the negative side. When we activate strand 6, we're also working with the 6th chakra, the 6th dimension. We're working with a part of ourselves, part of our substrand DNA coding that goes with the Azurite race from harmonic 2. That was part of that lineage when we had the Elohai down to the Anahazi down to the Azurites. Well, the Azurites were in harmonic 2, and they were blue-skinned, and it's considered the Syrian imprint. where the Anahasi imprint is considered the Lyran imprint. We're going to start a little meditation, just go on a journey to find our Syrian selves, the beginning of our indigo selves, our sixth strand selves, our sixth dimensional awareness. We're going to find our blue selves, our Syrian blue within. To find that self, we're going to have to go backward in time and forward in time. Just close your eyes for a minute and relax. Try to share a memory with me for a moment. Once upon a time, long, long ago, there was a place where there were two suns. A place that looked like Earth, but it had two suns instead of one in the skies. And in the evenings, which happened once about every 6 or 7 days at our scale, there were beautiful purple sunsets. Try to remember or visualize beautiful purple sunsets and two suns. Somewhere, each of you have been there. To get here, you've had to pass through. It is the domain of your Syrian self, your Azurite self, your Indigo self, that resided within the systems of harmonic 2. That self of you exists in a different space-time coordinate, but time is simultaneous. It all happens at once. It just appears to be separated. Right now, there's a part of you that exists right now in harmonic 2. A part of you that is an Azurite, part of you that is a blue Syrian being of great beauty, awareness, love, compassion, and magnitude. You can begin to sense that part of yourself by imagining someone standing behind you. And by the way, we've already done a group Maharic pillar, so if you want to pull up your pillars now, because we're doing energy work, you can from last night. If not, your fields are sealed to D12. You don't have to worry about anything you don't want touching your fields. But imagine something standing behind you right now, and try to feel a presence of energy that's a bit taller than you are. And if you're sitting, feel it standing, as if it has its gentle hands on your shoulders. Let this image stand for the part of your consciousness that's stationed in the sixth dimension. It contains within it the fourth, fifth, and sixth dimensional energies of your consciousness. It connects you to a different place in space-time that you passed through once and you will pass through again. If you ascend the slow way and don't go so fast you just turn into light and can't see any of the scenery. Feel your Syrian self behind you. Feel for a moment and visualize this two-dimensional energy field, like a cutout of energy standing behind you, as a beautiful blue color. It's blue with purple swirling through it like a blue-violet color. And it has some flickers of a lighter blue and a little bit of green, but mostly it has the blue-violet, the signature of the indigo energy field. The way the indigos are born at birth, they come in with this. Try to feel the presence now of your indigo self, your Syrian self, your D6 consciousness. Feel it embracing you, gently putting its arms around you from behind. And try to feel its energy running across your chest as if it were arms across your chest coming from behind. And telepathically say to your D6 consciousness, I would like to integrate now and become more whole. You are me and I am you, and the images are just illusions. In giving this command, you are not integrating with something that is not you. You are integrating with a part of yourself you had to leave an incarnation in harmonic 2 to get to harmonic 1. For you see, the stellar beings are us on higher harmonics. We're not separate, even though our biologies are different. We're just different manifestations of the same consciousness, stepping down through matter density. The Syrian self, the Syrian blue in all of us, can begin awakening sixth-dimensional consciousness and expedite soul integration very quickly. For a moment now, imagine that your indigo self has let go, has walked around in front of you, and keep your eyes closed, but try to feel its presence standing in front of you as you sit on your chair. Breathe in for a moment, and then gently exhale your energy and your awareness toward the indigo self standing before you. And try to spread your consciousness out within it. It's you, it's a part of you. Try to feel its presence and its wisdom. Next, imagine that the indigo self in front of you turns around facing the same direction as you are. And then it sits down and sits with you in your body. And it is only you and nothing else. Nothing else we will permit it to enter your fields. Only what is you. Try to feel the reality of your sixth-dimensional consciousness awake in your body. Imagine the vibration and color of blue-violet running like a little electric burst of energy through all of your cells. Little bursts of energy that may feel like little tiny shocks inside the cells that feel good. Try to feel the sensation of this part of yourself. For just as on the fourth dimension you have your astral body level, and you have on the fifth dimension your archetype identity level, on the sixth dimension, part of your anatomy is your Syrian blue level of consciousness, is part of your own anatomy. Now imagine for a moment that your attention is stationed at the center of the pineal gland in the middle of the brain, and you and your indigo self are still sitting together inside the body. And imagine a large indigo flame of blue-violet light emerges at the pineal. Try to feel the ripples of its wave spectra, its frequency, running through the cells down the body. Visualize the cells in the body beginning to take on the blue-violet hue. Now we're going to inhale, and on the exhale we're going to push the blue-violet flame outward around us as if we're sitting in it. Imagine now a large blue-violet flame is all around your body, and your pillar of light extends all the way up through the universe, through it, and down into the Earth's core. Feel the energy of the blue-violet flame around you. And begin to breathe its frequency in. On each inhale, pull energy from the flame into your heart chakra. And on each exhale, expand that energy that you pulled in from the flame all through the body. What you are doing is bringing in the sixth dimensional frequency into your bioenergetic field at the fourth dimensional level. You are expediting activation of strand 4, 5, 6. You are bringing in more of the consciousness of your Syrian blue indigo self. Every breath you take while you stay stationed within the blue-violet flame and expand into the heart chakra and through the body will further bring those frequencies into the astral body, and that will filter down into the mental body at D3 the emotional body at D2, and into the physical body structure at D1 through the DNA. You can use this simple technique of joining with your Syrian self, bringing in the sixth-dimensional consciousness by sitting in the blue-violet flame and breathing it into your heart chakra and expanding it into your body to more and more and more bring in those frequencies. And you may find tears come as great releases happen, for there is much pain stored between your three-dimensional consciousness and your sixth-dimensional consciousness. And as you bring in the healing frequencies of the sixth dimension, you will begin to shake loose those disharmonic patterns and set them back to the patterns of joy, which are the natural heritage of DNA that works properly and flashline sequences that are in order. Your Christed imprint begins with integrating the soul, and as you merge and regain your oneness with your Syrian self, your Syrian substrand DNA imprint, you will begin the completion of the soul integration process. And once that's done, your Lyran self will be next. But first, find your Syrian self, your indigo child within. Remember that you have one, for it is that part of you, more than anything else, that will help you to understand how to handle indigo children here and what you can do for them. You will find sixth-dimensional consciousness opening in you, and you will be the ones that can understand precious children born with sixth-dimensional consciousness available to them. If you take home with you the memory that you have a sixth-dimensional self, and take home and practice every morning before you wake up, before you open your eyes, simply breathe a little bit in from the blue-violet flame around you and just energize your body with it. It doesn't take long, and it's best before you open your eyes and make that transition. It'll help you remember your dreams better too. And then at night before you retire, put yourself back into the blue-violet flame like a sleeping bag. Tuck yourself into it. And every breath you take as you go into sleep will pull energy from the blue-violet flame into your cells to help you complete the soul integration process, activating strands 4, 5, and 6 more rapidly. Take this with you, and after 6 months, you may be amazed what you've learned and how you've grown. So we suggest keeping a notebook, tracking some of the things that come to you. Write it down. It's worth remembering. It's worth looking back on and saying, wow, look how my consciousness has grown. Then you will start to understand what the indigo children need. The processes that you will learn that will take you to those spaces are the processes that will awaken them in their highest light. And they will give great rewards in return in their presence here, in all that they will bring and teach. You can keep your Syrian self with you right now if you'd like. Or you can simply release it and see it go upward as a spark of light and out of the body back to its own station. But if you want it as company, let it stay with you for a while. You can separate it and put it out in your astral field and talk to it as if it's somebody separate, because it's a part of you you forgot you had. So you might as well treat it as a new acquaintance. It remembers you more than you remember it. Or you can keep it inside and get the warm fuzzy feeling some more. Or you can say, I've had enough, I'll talk to you later. Or never talk to you again if you feel that way. Just come back into the room with your consciousness and realize the power of the tool of using the blue-violet flame and integrating your 6 dimensions of consciousness. It is your heritage, and it is just the beginning of your heritage. Reclaim it while the opportunity is here to do so it may be there for many, many generations to come. For if you don't reclaim it, it will be lost for many, many millennia. Imagine as we come out of this meditation, a pillar of blue-violet light extending from way down into the earth's core, spiraling up, 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 upward into the universe through harmonic 1 and into harmonic 2. And there it connects through Tara, Earth's counterpart there, into a planet called Sirius B from here. This is a portal passage that only indigos and higher can go through. It is the third eye of Horus. And whether you stay here for many years in a body and walk through a stargate, or whether you go through the normal path of dropping the body in death and going as a consciousness, you can ascend this time. And it is the Sirius B, indigo, blue, violet, pillar of light that you will take from here upward into the sixth dimensional fields. Remember these images and play with them, and they'll call to you because they are your home. That is how you came, and it's how you will return. So play with the exercises. Find yourselves. Remember. It is remembering. There's no overwhelm here at the sixth dimensional state of consciousness. Feel the peace now in the room. No overwhelm. No, oh, look at all that information. Your Syrian self understands about the indigos, about the history. It knows all that stuff already. So it doesn't have to react to overkill of knowing too much too fast. If you feel overwhelmed in these days and weeks and years to come, bring your Syrian self into your body, because it will harmonize that, and you'll go into, oh, of course, I understand, and you'll relax the emotional body. I'd like to thank you for coming, and I hope that you'll come back, those who are interested in strategies that need to be taken for the indigos. I hope you'll come back this evening for the workshop. What time is it? 6:30, we begin the next one. It's about 5 now. What time are we supposed to end this one? 5? I'm on time for once. I actually ended a workshop on time for once. I usually go an hour over. Thank you.